Chun-He and Liang Peng weren't just angry at Xiao Long for his arrogant behavior or the chaos he brought. They were furious because he had crossed a line that few dare to tread, throwing living, breathing people into the jaws of the undead. It had only been 6 days since the world collapsed, and yet Xiao Long had already proven himself capable of true monstrosity. But then what about Bai Zemin? They had both watched as he, without hesitation or remorse, tossed Xiao Long, crippled, defenseless, into the horde of zombies. The man's screams echoed in their ears still, his terror and agony piercing through the storm like a cursed melody. And yet, Bai Zemin had remained unmoved, as if he was watching something entirely unrelated to himself. To Chun-He and Liang Peng, that kind of composure could only belong to a man who had already killed, who had already shed the moral skin most humans wore. Yes, maybe there were reasons, explanations, but fear often chooses the path of least resistance. And in this new world, it was far easier to assume the worst. Bai Zemin didn't need to read minds. The look in their eyes, the unease in their expressions, told him enough. They weren't the only ones either. Nearly every survivor around them now looked at him like he was something other than human. Yet not everyone. Among the shifting stares, one pair of eyes stood firm. Shangwan Bing Shui. Her bright, ice-blue eyes regarded him with the same calmness as before. No fear, no revulsion. In fact, if anything, there was less contempt in her gaze than usual. He stood and brushed dust off his knees, looking at her with faint curiosity. "You're not afraid of me?" "Afraid?" She raised a delicate brow, then glanced at Xiao Long's ravaged corpse. "Why would I be afraid of you for killing that? You didn't kill an innocent. You disposed of trash. I don't see anything wrong with that." Her voice was smooth and rational, as if she were commenting on a broken object being thrown away. For a moment, Bai Zemin was stunned. Her words were unexpected. Logical, but unexpected. Then he chuckled, softly shaking his head and turning to leave. This woman is interesting. But before he could take a full step away, her voice halted him. "Wait." He turned, eyes narrowed in question. Shangwan Bing Shui stepped closer and extended her hand, palm up. He blinked at the flawless, snow-white hand and then looked into her eyes. "What is it?" And for the first time, Bai Zemin saw her smile. It was stunning, like the first ray of sunlight after a blizzard. Cold and rare, yet mesmerizing. Unfortunately, her next words shattered the moment like glass underfoot. "You owe me a treasure," she said sweetly. "After all, I did wear him down for you. If I hadn't drained most of his mana, Xiao Long might have escaped. With his ability, you know how fast he could have run." Bai Zemin's lips twitched. Of course, that smile wasn't warmth. It was the grin of a fox that had just tricked the hen. And she wasn't wrong. If Shangwan Bing Shui hadn't kept Xiao Long distracted and bleeding mana, Bai Zemin might never have discovered the true nature of his ability. In a head-on clash, Xiao Long could have surprised him, or worse, escaped. Even with Bai Zemin's high stats, Xiao Long's short bursts of speed with air manipulation were a dangerous wild card. He might have been forced to reveal cards he wasn't ready to show. Still, Bai Zemin wasn't about to hand over something valuable easily. He smiled back at her, matching her energy, and extended his hand. "Sure, here you go." She frowned when he dropped the dagger into her palm. It was a decent weapon, no doubt, but it wasn't what she wanted, and he knew that. She had her eyes on the necklace. Bai Zemin gave her a polite nod, then turned and walked into the building. As he passed by the stunned survivors, they shrank away like sheep before a wolf. Shangwan Bing Shui clicked her tongue in annoyance, but kept the dagger anyway. As she prepared to take charge of the remaining survivors and secure the supplies Xiao Long had once hoarded, she noticed Chun-He watching her. His face was a mixture of shock, confusion, and something deeper. "Chun-He, are you all right?" she asked, brow furrowing. "Yeah, I'm fine." He forced a smile and nodded, but it didn't reach his eyes. She lingered for a moment, then turned and walked inside. Her mood was already complicated. There was no room for more speculation. Yes, Xiao Long was dead, and she had gained something for her part in his downfall. But watching Chun-He hesitate earlier, Watching him falter when she needed him most left a bitter taste. If he had acted decisively, if he had truly fought without hesitation, perhaps Qiao Long wouldn't have been able to capture her in the first place. If not for Liang Peng's intervention, things could have gone very wrong. Chunyi followed her with a dark expression. He knew she was right. He knew his hesitation had consequences. But what gnawed at him more than guilt was the smile. That smile she gave Bai Zemin. Even if it was calculated, even if it was manipulative, Chunyi had known her since childhood. He had admired her, chased her from afar, and never once, in all that time, had he seen her smile like that. To anyone. Now, for the first time, he saw it. And it wasn't for him. As they walked deeper into the shelter, a quiet storm brewed in Chunyi's heart. He started to notice what he had never wanted to admit before, that no matter how much they clashed, no matter how different they seemed, Shangwan Bingshui and Bai Zemin were more alike than anyone else. Too alike. And that terrified him more than any zombie ever could. The 20 or so survivors who had followed Bai Zemin and the other group leaders out of the gymnasium to deal with the food shortage were now integrated into the larger group, previously led by the now-deceased Qiao Long. Ironically, Qiao Long had once been hailed as a savior among many of the female survivors. He had rescued a number of women from the female dormitory during the early chaos, and as a result, the majority of the survivors under his leadership were women. Now, the survivor count hovered around 160, and close to 70% of them were female. On the fourth floor of the building, Bai Zemin sat at a long table with several key figures: Shangwan Bingshui, Chunyi, Liang Peng, Kai Jingyi, and a few others. Their discussion was critical. What to do next? No one wanted to remain trapped in the university forever. They each had their own goals, but for most, reuniting with their families was the highest priority. Despite the tension, Bai Zemin's words held a weight that even rivaled those of Shangwan Bingshui and the others. His execution of Qiao Long, brutal and public, had left a deep impression. Fear mingled with respect in the eyes of the survivors. No one dared speak against him. Suddenly, a soft, trembling voice interrupted the meeting. "Excuse me." Everyone turned to the door. A young girl stood there, shrinking under their collective gaze. Chunyi offered a warm smile, his tone gentle. "Don't worry. None of us are like Qiao Long. What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then dipped her head slightly. "My name is Ming Shui Shui. There's still people trapped in the female dormitory. They're probably starving." Shangwan Bingshui furrowed her brows. Didn't Qiao Long already clear that area? Ming Shui shook her head quickly. "He only made it to the third floor. Before we left, I saw something. A strange zombie. Its skin was blue, and its eyes were glowing green." The room fell silent. Bai Zemin's expression darkened. That description, it reminded him too much of the First Order blazing beetle. If this zombie was another evolved being, then dealing with it would be far more complicated. He wasn't confident about a clean victory. Noticing the shift in his expression, Shangwan Bingshui narrowed her eyes. "You think it's another evolved monster? Like the beetle you killed?" Liang Peng's eyes widened. "Wait, what? That thing was killed by you." He stood up abruptly, slamming his palms on the table. "You're saying Bai Zemin killed that massive elephant beetle alone? Are you serious?" Chunyi was equally shocked. "Did you actually see it happen, Bingshui? Or are you just taking his word for it?" There was doubt in his voice, doubt wrapped in disbelief and tension. But Shangwan Bingshui didn't answer. The moment was too urgent. After a brief pause, Bai Zemin spoke in a deep voice. "Based on the description, I'd say I'm 80% sure that zombie is a First Order being." Shangwan Bingshui locked eyes with him. "First Order?" Bai Zemin nodded and began to explain. He detailed what he saw in his interface when the beetle died, its level, and shared his theory about evolution among monsters, carefully, without revealing too much. As the implications of his words settled over the room, a heavy silence fell. The others stared at him, expressions shifting from shock to dread. If Bai Zemin was telling the truth, then his current strength far surpassed his apparent level. Taking advantage of the silence, Bai Zemin's voice turned cold. "I'll be honest with you all. I don't intend to risk my life saving people I don't know. especially not people who might not even say thank you. Shangwan Bing Shui's eyes flashed. Are you serious? There could be dozens, maybe hundreds, of women trapped up there. What about it? Bai Zemin replied calmly. My goal isn't to play hero. My goal is to survive and to find my family. His words were resolute. The beetle had been predictable. Slow. Bai Zemin could study its movements, exploit weaknesses. But a humanoid zombie that had evolved? If it had agility comparable to his own, one small mistake would mean a fatal bite or scratch. A single slip-up, and it was over. Bai Zemin saw no benefit in risking everything for strangers. Shangwan Bing Shui's disappointment was visible. Her estimation of him had been growing, until now. But then a thought struck her, a loophole in his own logic. Her expression changed. Eyes narrowing, she said coolly, Didn't you say you owed me a favor? That you'd repay me by saving my life if necessary? Bai Zemin's face froze. Shangwan Bing Shui stepped closer, her voice cutting like ice. Then come with me. Or are you so low that your promises mean nothing? Her challenge hung in the air, daring him to refuse.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Shangwan Bing Shui's words cooled the atmosphere even more than it already was, in the eyes of the few present, including the newcomer Ming Shi, unconsciously turned in Bai Zemin's direction, waiting for his response. Shangwan Bing Shui's gaze was fixed in Bai Zemin's eyes. She wanted to wait and see what kind of answer he would give after she said those words. However, she figured that considering how indifferent Bai Zemin had been so far, he would refuse. After all, who would risk their own life for a mere worthless word that was mentioned in the past, let alone considering that he was a man? Honestly, Shangwan Bing Shui was already mentally prepared to hear his negative response. However, Bai Zemin surprisingly nodded calmly and slowly said, Good. Since you put it that way, then I'll help you rescue those people. At the very least, I promise to do my best. Bai Zemin's father was a severe man who rarely expressed his emotions and did not get so involved in Bai Zemin's education because he knew that his thoughts were outdated. However, there was only one thing he always reminded Bai Zemin since he was a little kid. A man's word is more valuable than gold itself. If you can't even keep your own promises, then you are not worthy of being called man. Bai Zemin might have countless flaws, but he always kept his word and respected his parents, who sacrificed everything to raise him and give him the best life possible. Poor? Yes, but never a coward or a liar. Shangwan Bing Shui clearly did not expect this response from Bai Zemin, partly due to her disdain and hate for men. Therefore, when she saw him nodding his head and saying such words without even hesitating for more than a few seconds, she was surprised and for a moment did not know what to say. She looked at him as if she were looking at an alien and asked with some disbelief, What did you say? Bai Zemin ignored her question and stood up as he said, We should plan some things first. My left hand is currently practically broken as a result of my battle against the First Order blazing beetle 3 days ago, and I will need some time to fully recover. Saying that, Bai Zemin moved his left arm in various angles, and everyone quickly noticed that, indeed, the hand that was covered by a strange glove was moving erratically, as if it were jelly. Why not wait until you recover then? Chani looked at him with some concern and proposed, If you fight without being at your peak, you are likely to die. After all, that zombie might be just as strong or even stronger than the blazing beetle you faced before. But if we wait too long, those girls in the female dorm might actually end up starving to death. Liang Peng pointed out the problem. That's just the way things are. Bai Zemin looked at everyone one by one, studying the reaction of certain people and trying to understand what they were thinking. Chen-He looked at him with some surprise, jealousy, a hint of fear, and another hint of worry. Liang Peng looked at him with complex eyes. After all, not long ago the two of them had had a verbal confrontation that had almost turned into a confrontation of muscle, and considering what Liang Peng had seen so far from Bai Zemin, it was simply impossible for him to win. Kai Jingyi, Fu Xiefeng, and the other two students who had decided to follow Bai Zemin earlier were looking at him with concern. After all, Bai Zemin was basically the only source from which they could currently obtain power. especially Fu Xiefeng, who also felt extremely grateful to him. As for Shangwan Bing Shui, she was still seemingly stunned by something Bai Zemin did not understand. Then, listen carefully, as I will need your help for the odds of success to increase. Otherwise, we only have at most a 50 to 60% chance of getting out of that place alive. Bai Zemin began to explain each person's role as well as his idea for dealing with the evolved zombie. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the female dormitory. Inside a room on the 4th floor, several items were stacked in front of the door to block it. For girls were crowded on a bed, eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. Silence reigned throughout the room, as if there was no one living there. The atmosphere was extremely depressing. The 4 girls clearly understood that the zombies could tell where they were by the sounds. Therefore, none of them dared to speak too loudly. A girl whose stature was quite small whispered a question in an extremely low voice. Gao Min, I'm hungry. Is there anything left to eat? Gao Min, with a wry smile, said, Lina, that last packet of dry cookies left wasn't finished this morning by all of us. Gao Min, are you saying that we are going to die? Suddenly, another girl whose face was extremely adorable like that of a baby called Fan Wu, said this while looking at Gao Min. Her heart was filled with fear and anxiety as hunger began to test her sanity. Gao Min looked at her friend and comforted, Don't worry, Fan Wu. I'm sure someone will come soon to rescue us. But the whole place is plagued by zombies, and although one person killed several of them a few days ago and seemed to be extremely strong, in the end he even had to retreat. Linar recalled the scene where Qiao Long slaughtered zombies, apparently invincible. At that moment, as the 4 girls peeked out of the window in hiding, they thought they were safe. However, even that man with strange powers was forced to flee miserably after going up a couple of floors. The atmosphere became much heavier, and even Gao Min could not utter words of comfort this time. To be honest, even she had no hope of getting out of this place alive. The world had already become a mess, and here they were, locked up without daring to lift a finger. So why would anyone risk their lives to save them? However, that little hope was the only thing that kept these 4 girls together and sane after not eating properly for almost a week. I don't care who it is. If someone saves my life and gets me out of this hell, I'm willing to be his woman, said suddenly the only one of the 4 friends who had remained silent. Finding the opportunity, Gao Min joked softly, To be our Princess Charming's boyfriend, I wonder who will be so lucky. Bah! The girl from before rolled her eyes and giggled softly. Her name was Wu Yijuan. She had long black hair, a charming oval face, a beautiful pair of bright eyes, and her body was impressive. The bosom area was especially well fleshed out. Wu Yijuan was actually the second most beautiful woman in the entire university, right after Shangwan Bing Shui. Therefore, the number of men who courted her daily before the apocalypse were countless, and probably many of them would be willing to take the risk if they knew what she had just said. After the room was silent for several minutes, Wu Yijuan asked somewhat worriedly, You all think Bing Shui is safe? She is definitely fine. Gao Min didn't even hesitate this time and responded with certainty. Although she had only met Shangwan Bing Shui in the university, they had become quite close, and she knew that Shangwan Bing Shui was not a woman who gave up easily. You're right. Wu Yijuan sighed. She and Shangwan Bing Shui had been friends for many years, so it was clear to her that although her friend could be arrogant at times and her indifferent attitude could be a bit annoying to most, due to her family's strict upbringing and because of past problems, Shangwan Bing Shui would definitely not sit around and wait for death, unlike the 4 of them. Since Shangwan Bing Shui's life had already been hard and sad enough in the past, this new world would not be able to break her. This was what Wu Yijuan firmly believed. Bang! Suddenly, the sound of something crashing in the distance rang out amidst the silence. The 4 girls approached to the window carefully. Their eyes were filled with fear, but at the same time, there was a small glimmer of hope in the midst of that terror. Hope to be rescued and released from this building that had now become a prison that kept them safe, but at the same time was slowly killing them. Look, it's a person! Gao Min couldn't help but exclaim in delight as she tried to keep her voice under control. Could it be that help finally arrived? Lina observed as the zombies in the surrounding area began to move due to the sudden sound. These creatures that had been surrounding the place silently and without moving were the reason why none of the girls had tried to escape through the window, even with the hunger they felt. However, the sudden noise that broke the silence successfully lured them in. Wu Yijuan and Fan Wu also looked at the scene with shining eyes, longing to be rescued from hell once and for all. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Bai Zemin, Shangguan Bing Shui, Liang Peng, and Chun, he were standing on top of a 4-story building as they watched the zombies moving in their direction with trembling footsteps. That kid sure got braver now. Liang Peng couldn't help but point out as he looked ahead in slight surprise. Several meters away, on the ground, Fu Xiefeng was destroying the windows of the nearby buildings by hitting them with whatever he found in the middle of the road. In his hand, the Xianyuan sword was responsible for decapitating any zombies that came too close, and the full coat that Bai Zemin lent him temporarily had practically eliminated 70% of the risk of being infected by the creatures. With stats at least 2 to 3 times higher thanks to the gear equipped, Fu Xiefeng no longer feared the zombies, and after killing a few dozen of them, he had already absorbed enough soul power to become a level 6 evolver. Fu Xiefeng also decided to follow Bai Zemin's advice and assigned his acquired status points to agility and stamina every time he leveled up. With each time he felt his power increase, his gratitude to Bai Zemin only grew, and at the same time, he began to realize how big the difference in power was between himself and others. More than 2 hours had passed since Bai Zemin and the others had finished discussing the matter of rescuing the people locked in the female dormitory. During the meeting, a plan was formulated which consisted of 4 parts. The first part of the plan was to lure all the zombies or any other creature in the vicinity by making noise. That way they could avoid having to face other enemies and practically cut off the chances of being surrounded. At the same time, it would also open a path in case it was necessary to retreat. Kai Jingyi, it's your turn. Fu Xiefeng approached the pretty Kai Jingyi and took off the full coat and handed her the Xianyuan sword. Kai Jingyi nodded and took a deep breath before stepping forward and slowly approaching as she looked fearfully at the group of zombies whose limbs had been hacked off by Fu Xiefeng earlier. More than 20 zombies lay on the ground, writhing in their own blood that kept pouring out of the wounds as they constantly growled in her direction. Although their expressions were extremely atrocious and the smell of blood extremely repulsive, Kai Jingyi gritted her teeth and raised the sword high before fiercely slashing downwards. You have acquired the soul power of normal zombie level 4. Stamina plus 4. You have leveled up to level 2. You acquire 2 status points to distribute freely. Due to the spectacular edge possessed by the Xianyuan sword, a rare gray treasure with the ability to pierce through the defenses of almost any level 40 monster or enemy. The zombie's head split off as easily as if it were a hot knife cutting through butter. Kai Jingyi was clearly surprised, as she did not expect to end the zombie's life so easily. Precisely for this reason, she had used so much strength in her previous cut, and if it wasn't for the sickening sensation of cutting flesh that traveled from the blade of the sword to her hands, she might have even cut apart the ground. Still scared, but at the same time feeling a bit braver and curious, she carefully walked toward another zombie, and seeing that there was really no danger, she cut again. Suddenly, a mutated dog appeared in a corner, and attracted by the sound and smell of blood charged forward, while looking at Kai Jingyi with eyes filled with murderous intent. Kai Jingyi's face turned white as a sheet, and her brain seemed to stop working as all she could do was watch in fright as the mutated dog approached. The current situation was very different from the incapacitated zombies. Besides, with Kai Jingyi's average person speed, she could never escape from the mutated dog that was at least 3 to 4 times faster than a normal person. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 high-pitched hisses sounded from the distance, and the next thing that the scared Kai Jingyi saw was how the mutated dog fell down to the ground without even a growl of pain. Oh! An arrow had pierced the beast's head, another arrow had pierced its neck, and another arrow was firmly buried in its stomach. Red blood began to pour out of the holes slowly, forming a small puddle around the now lifeless body. Kai Jingyi looked at the mutated dog that had been killed in a split second before turning around to look at the building across the street, and quickly remembered that she wasn't really alone. Breathing a sigh of relief and smiling in thanks, she began to kill the rest of the zombies and level up. Each time she leveled up, she added a point in agility and a point in stamina, just like Fu Xiefeng, since in the beginning these two stats were the most important for survival. With enough agility, one could evade attacks and flee, as well as give the possibility to fight, but stamina was needed to withstand the exhaustion, or otherwise nothing would make sense. Chun-Yi sighed softly and lowered his bow. Currently, Chun-Yi's bow was not a treasure. It was just a normal bow, just like his arrows. Therefore, to pierce through the mutated dog's fur, he needed to imbue some mana into the tips of the arrows using some magic power. However, because he was not yet good enough at controlling this new power energy, the consumption was quite high in the long run. We should start with the third part of the plan soon, Bai Zemin said, and jumped out of the building without waiting for a reply. The second part of the plan was precisely to take advantage of the opportunity to empower those people with the courage to fight, and currently, there was little time left to finish. Therefore, it was time to implement the last two parts that represented the real beginning of the real battle. Fu Xiefeng, Bai Zemin shouted loudly without worrying about attracting other creatures or more zombies. In fact, that was the idea. Fu Xiefeng approached him quickly and with a look filled with adoration and gratitude asked, "Big brother Bai, do you need anything?" "That's enough for now. Have Kai Jingyi, Zhongde, and Kong Lan return to rest," Bai Zemin ordered in a deep voice. Zhongde was the other man who had decided to follow Bai Zemin. His body was in good condition due to being part of the university's substitute basketball team in the past. As for Kong Lan, she was the girl with glasses who also stood up, being the last of the only four who dared to accept Bai Zemin's tempting but dangerous offer. In the past, she was very studious and generally did not distinguish herself in anything. However, beneath her quiet appearance was a very brave and tenacious woman. When the four of them returned, Kong Lan handed the Xinyuan sword and the full coat to Bai Zemin. She had been the last of the four to kill zombies. "What levels are each of you?" Bai Zemin asked as he received the skill rolls they had obtained after hunting their first zombies. In order to have the people under his command more under control, he had requested that before using a skill they should be shown it to him. This was an idea he had come up with after what had happened with Fu Xiefeng. "My level is 5. I distributed equitably my points in agility and stamina," Kai Jingyi announced while staring at him. "Level 5. My choice was strength and agility." Zhongde responded in a serious voice before remaining silent. "My level is also 5, but..." Kong Lan seemed to want to say something, but hesitated. However, in the end, she slowly explained, "I haven't distributed my status points yet. I have 10 free." "Oh." Bai Zemin looked at her a little confused and slowly asked, "Why is that so?" "If you look at the skill I got, you'll understand." Kong Lan pointed to the scroll she had handed to Bai Zemin. Bai Zemin said nothing and nodded silently before he began to inspect the skill scrolls. Agility boost, unclassified passive skill, level 3. After learning this skill increases agility by plus 20 points permanently. Power boost, unclassified skill, level 3. To activate this skill, you need to consume 3 mana points. After activation, it increases strength by plus 35 points for 5 minutes. After the effect is finished, the skill has a cooldown time of 20 minutes. Lesser healing, first order skill, level 1. To activate this skill, 10 mana points must be consumed and the user must possess at least 5 magic points. It can heal minor wounds, and its constant use can accelerate the healing of bone fractures. Magical power influences the healing. It can be used twice a day, and after that it goes into cooldown for 12 hours. Agility boost had been acquired by Kai Jingyi. Power boost had been acquired by Zhongde. And lesser healing had been acquired by Kong Lan. For the first 2 skills, Bai Zemin's reaction was quite casual. However, upon seeing the skill obtained by Kong Lan, he could not help but be surprised. Omicron Epsilon. Even when Fu Xiefeng had incapacitated the zombies, Kong Lan actually obtained such a good skill. This was something Bai Zemin did not expect. According to what Lilith had told him a few days ago, even if they hunted stronger monsters, they would get the same as they would get in case of killing a zombie, since the soul record seemed to be able to distinguish when a person received outside help and when they did something on their own. It was for this reason that Bai Zemin did not bother looking for more powerful monsters. Little did he expect that Kong Lan would obtain a skill of such quality. Although she wasn't useful in combat by any means, with this skill, as long as someone protected her, she could take care of healing from behind. Of course, for such a thing to be possible, Kong Lan needed to have a lot of mana, and the more magic the better. Although there was still a long way to go, Bai Zemin couldn't help but look at the girl with glasses as if she was some kind of treasure. Perhaps sensing the change in his gaze, Kong Lan couldn't help but squirm a little as she blushed slightly. Kong Lan, what are your current stats? Bai Zemin asked after thinking for a moment. Kong Lan's eyes moved as she looked at the personal status window that only she could see and carefully said, Strength 4/agility 5/stamina 8/mana 20/magic 35. That's what it says here. Bai Zemin's eyes lit up and Lilith's voice sounded beside him. Oh, this girl has a decent amount of magic power. In fact, while she was not that impressive when compared to Bai Zemin, and while the rest of her stats were average at best, Kong Lan possessed at least twice as much mana as a normal person would obtain after the advent of Soul Record, and her magical power was also at the level of a human genius. I see. Bai Zemin outwardly remained calm, without letting the surprise he felt show on his face, and slowly said, Allocate all your points in mana and magic. You decide the distribution. All right. Kong Lan nodded immediately before allocating the 10 points to both stats. She also understood Bai Zemin's intention and was secretly delighted. While it was true that her battle power would be extremely low compared to Kai Jingyi and the rest, if she managed to get her hands on an active magic skill, then her power would also skyrocket through the roof, becoming a fish that jumped through the Dragon Gate. Besides, as long as Bai Zemin was there, Kong Lan knew that her safety and well-being would definitely be guaranteed. As for if Bai Zemin died, then Kong Lan would have no hope of surviving against an enemy capable of defeating him. Therefore, she also did not worry about problems about which she had no solution. Each of you learn your respective skill. Bai Zemin handed back the skill scrolls before looking at Kong Lan and commanded, Kong Lan, use your skill on my left hand. The scroll in her hands turned into countless white light particles that entered her body. Deep within her soul, a transparent colored rune with strange white lines formed. Kong Lan stretched both hands forward, and as if she had done it all her life, she activated the skill. A faint pale white light flashed in her hands and enveloped Bai Zemin's broken hand. Kong Lan's face turned a little pale after the abrupt loss of half of her mana reserves. However, seeing Bai Zemin still staring at her, she gritted her teeth and activated her skill once again, thus expending all her mana in a matter of seconds. Bai Zemin felt the changes immediately, as he could clearly feel his broken wrist being repaired, and the sound of bones clinking together once again was extremely clear, sending a shiver down everyone's spine. Bai Zemin felt a great amount of pain coming from inside his wrist. The pain was such that he was forced to grit his teeth to prevent a grunt from escaping his mouth. However, that excruciating pain soon began to turn into itching, extremely uncomfortable itching. Fortunately, that feeling was also short-lived, probably thanks to Kong Lan's skill. Kong Lan's face turned completely pale, and her previously red lips began to lose their color, as if she was suddenly suffering from some kind of illness. She staggered slightly at the sudden dizziness that hit her mercilessly. Fortunately, Bai Zemin had already expected something like this to happen due to the fact that he himself had experienced the same feeling during his battle against the First Order Blazing Beetle after spending all of his mana abruptly. Good job, Kong Lan. Bai Zemin smiled slightly at her and nodded as he gently supported her while keeping her from falling. No, it's nothing. She forced a smile. Although she was exhausted and felt somewhat nauseated as a consequence of using all her mana in such a short time, she actually felt extremely satisfied since receiving such praise from Bai Zemin, who was usually indifferent and casual with others, meant that he really appreciated her previous act, no matter how small it was. He looked at Kai Jingyi and said in a deep voice, "Kai Jingyi, support Kong Lan and help her rest." Kai Jingyi nodded and quickly stepped forward to support her, and they both retreated inside the building. After freeing himself, Bai Zemin looked at Fu Xiefeng and Zhongde in front of him and began to give a series of simple orders and instructions about what they were to do next. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Meanwhile, Liang Peng, Chun He, and Shengwan Bingshui were preparing to start and implement the third part of the plan to defeat the zombie. Although they weren't 100% sure if it was a first-order evolved creature or not. In this new world where death was only half a step away, it was best to prepare as best as possible to even fight the weakest enemy. This should be enough. Shengwan Bingshui retracted both hands as she panted softly. Her chest was rising and falling steadily as a small bead of sweat slowly slipped down from her beautiful face that now looked sickly white instead of perfect white as before. In front of her was an ice stake about half a meter long. Along the length of the ice stake were ice spikes about 5 centimeters long that pointed outward. It was a weapon with great piercing power, capable of entering the target's body with ease, and because of the spikes along the body in the opposite direction, it would be extremely difficult for anyone who was pierced by it to break free easily. "Are you okay?" Chun-Yi asked as he patted her back. "You don't need to worry. I'm fine." Shengwan Bing Shui shook her head gently and took a step forward to pick up the ice stake to take a better look at it. Although the stake was extremely thin as a stick and looked extremely fragile, Shengwan Bing Shui was confident in her creation. After all, she had consumed 90% of her mana, which was why she was so mentally exhausted. Not only had Shengwan Bing Shui concentrated practically all her mana into this small half-meter ice stake, but she had also packed every bit of her magical power into it, and had focused every cell of her brain into her creation. To say that this ice stake was the strongest and most enduring weapon she had created so far with her ice skill was by no means an exaggeration. To test her theory and to check the strength of the object, she asked Liang Peng to hit the ice stake with his hammer while using all his strength. "If this thing breaks, don't blame me later." Liang Peng couldn't help but scratch his head as he looked at the small stake. If it can't resist at least that much, then the plan we came up with earlier will never work in the first place. Shengwan Bing Shui replied coldly. Liang Peng shrugged his shoulders and raised the hammer high. With loud roar, he struck downward with all his might as he made use of the weapon's weight to the perfection. Yes, bang! With a mighty bang, the ground shuddered as if it would collapse at any moment, and several cracks appeared extending over a meter long. However, to Chun-He's surprise and Liang Peng's disbelief, the ice stake under the hammer that had taken the brunt of the impact actually didn't even splinter, since it still released that bone-chilling coldness that seemed to be able to freeze everything. Impressive, Chun-He praised honestly. That earlier strike should have been able to knock down an entire wall, but the ice stake that Shengwan Bing Shui crafted withstood it like it was nothing. Shengwan Bing Shui also nodded, and a hint of satisfaction flashed in her eyes. "I see you guys are done here," Bai Zemin returned, directly jumping to the upper floor and entering through the window. Although such a thing was impossible in the past, with his current stats, such a thing was no longer a big deal. "All done here," Chun-He replied as he looked at him curiously and asked, "The things on your side finished?" "Finished," Bai Zemin responded and sat in a corner while checking his left hand. Before, Bai Zemin estimated that he would need at least 1 more week for his fractured wrist to fully recover. However, he was pleasantly surprised to discover that he now only needed approximately 5 days to fully recover. The reason for this was, naturally, the lesser healing skill used by Kong Lan on him. Of course, Kong Lan's lesser healing skill alone was not the reason for Bai Zemin's quick recovery. The other important reason was his overwhelmingly high health stat, which, compared to a normal person, was speeding up his healing process almost tenfold. With 90 health points, and Konglan skill along with his high magic power compared to a normal person. The speed at which Bai Zemin was recovering was simply astonishing. Bai Zemin estimated that, with treatment twice a day for 3 days, his broken bones would be reattached and repaired. A small smile appeared on his face as he thought about how incredibly great the difference in power was between the past him and the present him. Bai Zemin couldn't wait to see what the future held for him. Of course, first he needed to survive the next battle, in which a scratch meant death. Only then was it possible to think about a possible future. However, if he couldn't survive even that much, then it meant that somewhere along the way, sooner or later, he would end up falling. While Bai Zemin checked his physical condition, Shengwan Bing Shui had sat down in another corner to recover the consumed mana. After all, she was an essential fighter in the upcoming battle. Moreover, occasionally, she looked in his direction with complicated eyes. There was hatred, but there was also gratitude. There was approval, but there was also rejection. Complex and opposing emotions were constantly mixed together. Shengwan Bing Shui was a wary person by nature. Moreover, such wariness was especially high against men, as throughout her life, she had received different looks and treatment from men based on her appearance. However, the fact that Bai Zemin kept his word, even when he clearly had little to gain and might even end up dying on this mission, had caught her off guard. At the same time, it made her realize that maybe, just maybe, not all people or even all men would look or act the same way towards her. Of course, such a thought was still in its infantile stages and was just that, a fleeting thought. As to whether that thought would turn into something more, such as confidence, it was too early to say. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. After staying inside the building for 3 whole hours, Shengwan Bing Shui's mana had recovered enough to influence the battle to come. During these 3 hours, none of the 4 especially did anything, with only Chunhe and Shengwan Bing Shui chatting occasionally, and Liang paying sudden interruption by saying something not too meaningful and inconsequential. As for Bai Zemin, he just sat quietly in a corner while looking at a small picture with a longing look that no one could see except Lilith, who was silently sitting beside him. There were 4 people standing in the picture, with an adult couple behind a little boy and girl of barely 8 or 9 years old. In the background was the beautiful green view where the trees spread out in the distance like an endless sea. This picture was a family photograph of Bai Zemin's parents, his little sister, and himself. At that time, he had just had his birthday, and his mother decided to go with the whole family to visit the Great Wall of China and other beautiful places with history. This was a treasured memory that Bai Zemin always took everywhere with him, since due to the distance between the university and his home, he could not see his family often. Now, in this crazy world where trust and betrayal went hand in hand even more than in the past, Bai Zemin could only gather warmth from past memories that previously had not been so important to him, as he considered it something normal. Family, Lilith asked, even though she already knew the answer. After all, this was the first time in 6 days that she had seen such an expression on his usually stone-hard face. Bai Zemin nodded in response. Although he and Lilith did not talk a lot, Bai Zemin knew that she was there for him, and, strange as it was, deep in his soul he trusted that she would not betray him. Although he and she were usually silent, Bai Zemin felt very comfortable since he had never been a person of many words even before the arrival of the soul record to this world. The silence that usually surrounded them was in no way uncomfortable. On the contrary, it was extremely relaxing. My mana recovered almost completely. Shengwan Bing Shui's icy voice brought Bai Zemin out of his thoughts. When he lifted his face, his longing gaze could no longer be seen anywhere, and that face that practically let nothing be seen on him ruled once again. If you are ready, we can start now. Shengwan Bing Shui stared at him with an expression just like his and pointed. Then let's start now. There's no point in wasting more time, and further delays might make things more difficult than they already are. Bai Zemin stood up and let out a small sigh inaudibly. Shengwan Bing Shui and the other 2 nodded to express that they thought the same way he did and also stood up. Bai Zemin seemed to want something, but after a moment's hesitation, he decided to simply shook his head and walked towards the window without another word. Nigerian Irio. Before he could leave, Chun-Hee's voice rang at his back. Hey, Bai Zemin. Bai Zemin turned around and looked at him with questioning eyes. Be careful. If you think the zombie is too hard, just run. We could try another day. Chun-Hee nodded and looked at him with a serious expression. After a slight surprise, Bai Zemin nodded and said in a clear voice, I'm relying on you for the next part. Chun-Hee gave him a thumbs up as if telling him to leave it to him. Seeing this, Bai Zemin no longer dawdled and jumped out the window before turning into a gale of wind charging towards the building a few streets away, the female dormitory. When Bai Zemin left, Liang Peng looked at Chun-Hee with raised eyebrows and laughed. I thought you didn't like that guy very much. Aren't you two rivals in love or something? Ha ha ha. Chun-Hee frowned and looked at him with some anger as he slowly said, The reason why I don't like him too much is because of his previous cruel act. He is not my rival in love. Besides, just because I don't like Bai Zemin too much because of his cruelty doesn't mean I hate him. Isn't it natural to wish him good luck? At the end of the day, he's still our ally. TSK, what a boring guy. Liang Peng, who expected Chun-Hee to blush in embarrassment after having his feelings exposed, in the end ended up shrugging his shoulders and clicking his tongue when he saw that the handsome archer's reaction was normal and calm. Shangwan Bing Shui looked at him coldly and said in an icy voice, If you have time to talk nonsense, why don't you prepare yourself as well? Liang Peng snorted and walked towards the exit with his big hammer on his shoulder. With such a weight, he didn't dare jump out of the window, or he might end up breaking both his legs trying to show off. After Liang Peng disappeared, Shangwan Bing Shui picked up what appeared to be a string and tied it to the tip of the ice stake before freezing it and joining the string and the stake together. This string was actually carbon fiber and was taken from gym exercise machines. It was especially resistant to weight and extremely durable under pressure, as well as being a very good, flexible material capable of withstanding sudden pulls. It was usually used in the creation of boats, cars, airplane parts, bicycle hoops, etc. Although the quality depended, the carbon fiber cable Shangwan Bing Shui was using was very strong and flexible. Seeing that the two of them were alone, Chun-Hee decided to break the silence. Bing Shui, about what Liang Peng said earlier, about rivals and dash. Focus. Shangwan Bing Shui interrupted him before he could continue and while looking out the window, reminded him, Your help is crucial here. You can't afford to lose focus no matter what. Seeing Shangwan Bing Shui interrupting him without letting him continue, Chun-Hee smiled bitterly and shook his head before sighing and getting to work. Obviously, she knew what he was going to say. However, Shangwan Bing Shui not only had no interest in anything romantic, but even though she trusted Chun-Hee enough to call him a friend, he was just that, a friend. At the end of the day, his friendship was what Shangwan Bing Shui cherished, but if he was looking for more than that, at this moment he would only get hurt if he listened to her answer. As for the future, that no one knew. It was just that considering how many years Shangwan Bing Shui and Chun-Hee had spent together, but even then he failed to get into her heart, it would be difficult for such a friendship to turn into something more than friendship. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the female dormitory. Great, this time we are saved. Li Na exclaimed as she used both hands to muffle the sound of her voice, overflowing with excitement and joy. We will be saved. Gao Min and Fan Wu hugged each other as they sobbed, emotionally moved to the point of tears. Even the generally positive Gao Min was beginning to lose all hope after so many days without a proper meal and locked up in a place that was like a prison to them. Girls, look. Wu Yijuan quickly noticed a young man charging toward the female dormitory. However, when she wanted to point him out for her friends to see, he had already disappeared with lightning speed. Fast! Wu Yijuan was surprised and secretly glad. The more powerful this person proved to be, the better news for the girls, as the hopes of being rescued would increase exponentially as well. Trapped in the girls' dormitory, seeing no chance of survival, where if they didn't die of starvation or thirst, they would die of being eaten by a zombie. With such a cruel and devastating reality, if it hadn't been for the girls cheering each other on, they all would have gone crazy right now. A couple of days ago, when they saw Qiao Long show seemingly invincible power, they believed that help had finally arrived. However, Even he who was as strong as a superhuman was forced to retreat miserably by some unknown entity. The girls really couldn't take it anymore. At the same time as they were celebrating to lift their moods, the zombies outside the door headed towards the girls' dormitory and began to violently attack the door. The four girls shut their mouths without daring to make another sound, not even daring to move, standing together in silence, staring at the door in fear. In their eyes, the door represented a prison that contained them trapped here, but at the same time, it also represented their escape and survival. If the door fell, they all knew there would be no chance of survival. Bang! Suddenly, there was a loud bang coming from somewhere in the building, and the zombies pounding on the dormitory door stopped. The girls sighed in relief as they felt the beasts growl and move away with shaky steps in the opposite direction. The four girls looked at each other with fear and a touch of hope as they sat on a bed, all together facing the door. Now, all they could do was wait. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Bang! Bai Zemin appeared before the firmly closed front door of the female dormitory and kicked it open. The bang of the metal door opening wide resounded everywhere, and the echo traveled among the nearby buildings. Because the zombies in the vicinity had already been eliminated earlier by Fu Xiefeng and the rest, no creature appeared. However, Bai Zemin was not satisfied and frowned tightly. Why doesn't this zombie come out? Bai Zemin thought silently. Until now, as long as there was a certain amount of noise, the zombies would definitely advance in that direction. However, even after making such a commotion, the strange zombie that this Ming Shui girl had seen before leaving here did not show itself. RAOES. Bai Zemin's wariness increased another notch as he walked towards the inside of the building with slow and cautious steps. Although Ming Shui had said that Xiao Long had cleared the first 2 floors before having to retreat on the 3rd floor, Bai Zemin did not trust anything but what he saw with his own eyes at the moment. The smell of rancid blood and rotting flesh embraced Bai Zemin's nostrils as soon as he had taken a step inside. Zombie corpses and people lay everywhere, creating a catastrophic scene scary enough to scare the most macho man in the world. However, after experiencing and seeing with his own eyes so many people dying, Bai Zemin felt that he could bear at least that much. Therefore, after stopping for a moment, he continued to move forward slowly. The lower floor was devoid of any sign of life. Only corpses and death was what could be seen in that area. Upon reaching the 2nd floor, after carefully climbing the stairs, what greeted Bai Zemin was exactly the same sight he had seen on the 5th floor, and if it wasn't for the different clothing on each body or the position they were in after dropping dead, he might have thought that he was still on the previous floor. It was upon reaching the 3rd floor that Bai Zemin finally saw signs of movement. More than 50 zombies were slowly advancing down the corridor in the direction of the stairs. All of these zombies were women who had been infected after being scratched or bitten, or who simply became mindless creatures after the arrival of the Soul Record and the Mana Movement. While 50 zombies were no challenge at all for someone like Bai Zemin, when you put those 50 zombies in an enclosed space where there was hardly any room left to move properly, things were different, and the difficulty was multiplied by countless times. Fortunately for him, thanks to his rare grade treasure, full coat things were not as complicated as they seemed to be. Moreover, unlike zombies and unintelligent animals, humans could think of countermeasures to adapt to whatever situation they had to face. After a moment's thought, and considering that there was a creature capable of threatening his life, Bai Zemin decided to play it safe instead of trying to show off before Lilith. He retreated towards the stairs until he reached the 2nd floor and waited for the zombies there. His back was almost touching one of the walls, and the left side of his body was against the corner where the staircase wall and the wall of the lower floor met. This way, he could prevent being attacked from behind, he could avoid receiving attacks with his damaged hand, and at the same time, he would be able to react with his right hand immediately in case someone tried to attack him from the only possible angle there was. The first zombies soon reached the stairs and began to descend. However, as expected, they fell on their faces as they rolled down to where Bai Zemin was waiting for them. Because the zombies could not control their own bodies properly, and because they only knew how to advance in a straight line, the steps of the stairs became their doom. Bai Zemin swung his sword relentlessly up and down again and again. The zombies' heads rolled on the floor constantly, and blood had begun to accumulate after the escalating slaughter, forming a small red pool under his own feet. But it wasn't just Bai Zemin who was killing zombies. Zombies coming from behind were often stomping other zombies to death, and many other zombies were falling head over heels, breaking their necks after hitting the floor hard. 2 minutes later, all 50 zombies had been completely obliterated by Bai Zemin. Not a single zombie could even react after falling before their heads rolled on the ground. You've gotten a little better with the sword. Lilith smiled slightly as she looked down at his crotch and said in a playful voice, I wonder if you're also so good with that sword down there. The corner of Bai Zemin's mouth constricted a couple of times. However, instead of remaining silent as usual, this time he decided to ask a question that had been bothering him for several days now. Lilith, since you're a succubus, you've probably slept with many men throughout your life, no? You? Lilith opened her eyes, slightly surprised by the rather daring question. However, she felt no shame and responded in a flat voice. You humans have an imagination that is too wild. What do you mean? Bai Zemin asked as he climbed the stairs again. He decided to talk with Lilith to calm the nerves he felt and to lure the creature that was hiding. In fact, Lilith's jokes often relaxed Bai Zemin's heavy mood, and she was undoubtedly one of the reasons why he was still able to stay completely sane. Even though I'm a succubus, that doesn't mean I have to sleep with a man to gain power. Lilith followed him a few steps behind and rolled her eyes as she slowly said, Isn't it obvious? Just like you, to evolve further and become more powerful, I need to defeat powerful enemies and absorb massive amounts of soul power. Bai Zemin couldn't help but look back with slight surprise on his face and asked the stupidest question of his entire life. But aren't you a succubus? For the love of the devil, are you dumb? Lilith couldn't help but smack him upside the head and say in a serious voice, While among us succubi there are some who are promiscuous, I'm not like that. Do you think that just because I joke with you, I have slept with many men? Hard as it may be to believe, in my entire life, I have never allowed a man to even see my naked body, let alone sleep with one. Bai Zemin's footsteps stalled, and he stared at her with eyes filled with disbelief. Virgin, what's wrong with that? Lilith looked at him with a seductive smile and said in a whisper, Could it be that you want to take my purity now? Kia, little Zemin, you are such a bad guy. Bai Zemin's breathing became somewhat ragged upon hearing the demon's whisper, and he quickly shook his head, regretting asking that. Lilith also stopped joking, knowing that Bai Zemin's life was on the line here, and started to explain some things slowly. What you humans imagine and the stories you create are not exactly correct. For example, we succubi are beautiful by nature, and our sex appeal incredibly high. But that's just it. Our charm is higher. Well, although I am probably one of the most beautiful women in existence, and even among the higher existences, I have yet to meet a woman capable of exceeding me. Feel honored, little Zemin. Whoa, your humility is truly incredible. Bai Zemin joked as he decapitated a group of 3 zombies that came out of a room whose door had been kicked down. Hey, I'm serious. Lilith began to act like a little girl who had been bullied. Her innocent act was extremely cute and attractive, creating a beautiful contrast to her seductive body. Yes. Bai Zemin casually nodded as he continued slaughtering zombies. Whatever you say, Your Majesty, beautiful queen. Lilith knew that Bai Zemin didn't believe her, so she simply clicked her tongue and her eyes glittered with a hint of hesitation. However, in the end, she shook her head softly and decided not to do what she was thinking or things might get out of hand. On the other hand, Bai Zemin had already finished off over 1,300 zombies that were scattered all over the 3rd floor. The female dormitory was huge, as was the male dormitory. After all, the university was extremely large and the number of students simply too many to count. AO Beta. While it was true that not everyone stayed on campus, at least 40% did. The men's dormitory and the female dormitory were large buildings only 4 or 5 stories high, but stretching for several yards around. You have acquired the soul power of normal zombie level 5. You have leveled up to level 21. You have acquired 2 status points to distribute freely. Phew. Good timing. Bai Zemin was starting to feel a bit exhausted. However, after killing the 500 zombie, the sweet message telling him that he had leveled up appeared in his retina, relieving that exhaustion immediately. After about 10 minutes, Bai Zemin had finally cleared the way to the stairs leading to the 4th floor. According to the story told by Ming Shui, Xiaolong had been repulsed by a strange zombie upon reaching the 3rd floor, and, so far, almost everything matched, as Bai Zemin could not see corpses destroyed by the air cannons of Xiaolong's skill. But where was that zombie then? Bai Zemin's answer came soon enough, because as soon as he stepped on the top step of the staircase that led to the 4th floor of the building, a horrifying pressure enveloped his body as if it wanted to devour him in one piece. This pressure was so strong that Bai Zemin had only felt something similar once in his life so far. The pressure Bai Zemin felt when his feet reached the 4th floor of the building was very great, and although he did not know how it felt to have a waterfall of water hitting him from several meters high, he estimated that surely it should feel similar to what he was feeling at that moment. However, the corner of Bai Zemin's mouth turned up into a small smile instead of twitching. I really have become stronger, haha. Bai Zemin laughed out loud and took a step forward as he tightened his grip on the hilt of the Xinyuan sword. Right? The current Bai Zemin was no longer the same Bai Zemin of the past. The current him was no longer the same level 15 Bai Zemin, who could only run and plan to barely have a slim chance of victory against the First Order Blazing Beetle. He was currently a powerful level 21 evolver who had absorbed massive amounts of pure soul power, including the soul power of a First Order monster. Bai Zemin stopped hesitating when he realized that while he might be unable to win in one-on-one, he wouldn't necessarily lose either. It would all depend on what kind of skill the evolved zombie possessed. With a steady gaze, Bai Zemin activated his First Order blood manipulation skill and cast it on himself. Of course, his intention was not to hurt himself. His aim was different from all the previous times. What was adrenaline? Adrenaline was a hormone and could also be considered a substance. The substance possessed the ability to constrict the blood vessels, dilate the airways, and increase the heart rate. But when did this substance show itself? The body begins to secrete adrenaline when it feels threatened or in danger, and this substance travels through the blood as a means to reach every part of the body. In addition, adrenaline had great benefits, some of them being the improvement of reflexes, increased reaction speed, and many other effects. So, what would happen if Bai Zemin increased his own blood flow and made the adrenaline start traveling at faster speeds? Would it enhance those characteristics even more? You're crazy. Lilith's eyes widened in disbelief as she stared at Bai Zemin as if he was an unknown beast. Honestly, Bai Zemin was not the only existence capable of manipulating blood to some extent. Lilith knew someone who was even more powerful than her, who possessed a similar natural skill. However, that other existence had clearly never thought of using such a skill in a self-destructive manner on himself when he was still weak. The reason? Using one's own skill on one's own body was extremely dangerous unless such a skill was a blessing or benefit of some sort. However, Bai Zemin's blood manipulation skill was a skill intended for attack and not to be used on himself. Even less so when he did not even possess initial mastery over his own skill. Although it was risky, Bai Zemin's situation was already dangerous to begin with. Besides, in this world, if one did not take risks in the early stages when everything was simpler, then one could only expect death in the later stages. Bai Zemin had understood all this very well, and that was precisely why he decided to gamble. And his gamble, along with his high magical power, proved to be right. He could feel his heart rate increasing after activating his blood manipulation skill, and the blood throughout his body began to move twice as fast as normal. Bai Zemin did not dare to force it any further than this. His pupils dilated, improving his overall vision of his surroundings. Due to the faster circulation of adrenaline, blood glucose increased, and Bai Zemin could feel how his body seemed to have more energy than the past. Doing this was extremely dangerous and consumed mana constantly, as Bai Zemin had to keep his blood manipulation skill constantly activated. However, at this point, as long as the battle ended as quickly as possible, it was a good thing. Bai Zemin stomped the ground beneath his feet and shot forward at full speed, flashing between the unfamiliar corridors in search of the strange zombie. Due to his high speed and how small the corridors were in comparison, from a certain point of view, it seemed as if he was blinking short distances constantly. The fourth floor was practically undisturbed, unlike the first two floors, which were littered with corpses and blood. There was also no sign of zombies or any other strange creature, so Bai Zemin correctly assumed that all the zombies on the fourth floor had probably gone down to the third floor and joined the zombies there, explaining why there were so many of them. Another strange thing was that no door had been broken down yet, and while there were many open, most were firmly closed, so the odds were high that there were still people alive inside, since if they were zombies, they probably would have fought to destroy the door the first day the world changed in search of food. Bai Zemin took out several bottles of blood from his backpack, and due to the adrenaline coursing through his veins, he almost didn't feel the pain when he opened the bottles with his still half-broken hand. Then he began to spread blood on the ground. For every corridor he went through, Bai Zemin spread a 2-liter bottle of blood on the ground. Finally, after more than 20 bottles of blood, and leaving himself with only 10 in reserve for emergencies, and leaving aside the first-order blazing beetle blood needed to evolve his blood manipulation, Bai Zemin stopped dead in his tracks and waited patiently there. Although he could not sense where the horrendous pressure was coming from exactly, he could sense that the creature was rapidly approaching him. Suddenly, Bai Zemin felt a gale of wind charging towards him, and without hesitation, he jumped to the side while slashing with his sword diagonally. Clang! The sound of 2 clashing metals echoed throughout the corridor, traveling through practically the entire 4th floor as proof of how powerful the clash between the two was. Feeling the sudden rush of air approaching his back at breakneck speeds, Bai Zemin did not even hesitate for a moment as his body reacted before his brain did. Doing a 180-degree turn and raising his sword high, Bai Zemin's 85 strength points completely burst out as he slashed downward ferociously as if he wanted to split his enemy into 2 pieces. Clang! The sound of metal clashing against metal resounded loudly, and Bai Zemin felt his right arm go very slightly numb. However, his strength stat was not low at this point, so he was not forced to retreat. "You finally came out, you damn zombie." A smile rose on Bai Zemin's face as he looked at his expected enemy. Indeed, Ming Shui's description was lacking, but accurate. The beast was undoubtedly a zombie. However, unlike normal zombies or any other zombie Bai Zemin had encountered so far, this zombie had completely deep blue skin. The zombie's eyes were wide open, and unlike the rest of the zombies, the greenish glow in its eyes showed that its sight was there, unlike normal zombies that could not see anything. But the most striking thing was that its body seemed to be extremely agile, and instead of 2 arms, it had 2 strange, sharp-looking sword-like blades as limbs. "Scram!" Bai Zemin shouted as he pressed the full weight of his body forward, while applying all his strength on the sword that had collided with one of the zombie's blades. Surprisingly, the zombie was forced back several steps. This showed that its strength was undoubtedly inferior to Bai Zemin's. Grr! A strange grunt came out of the zombie's mouth, and suddenly its body leaned forward, disappearing from the place where it was standing a moment ago. Fast! This zombie was incredibly fast. Bai Zemin's pupils dilated even more, and while gritting his teeth, he immediately slashed towards its right side with all his might. Clang! Bang! After a powerful metallic clang, the zombie that was fast but obviously did not possess particularly high strength was sent flying and slammed hard into the opposing wall. However, Bai Zemin couldn't help but be a little scared. If it wasn't for his earlier experiment making use of his blood manipulation skill to somewhat control and increase the adrenaline outflow, then his normal reflexes would not have been enough for him to be able to react in time to the earlier attack. This meant that he would have been dead by now. Dead after just 1 trade. That's how terrifying the creatures that had officially taken a step on the path of evolution were. Even more so, this zombie that only needed 1 cut to turn Bai Zemin into one of its comrades. Bai Zemin seized the opportunity when the evolved zombie was sent flying and activated his skill blood manipulation. The blood he had spread in this corridor suddenly turned into 10 blood chains, and under his control, they flew towards the evolved zombie. The evolved zombie's greenish eyes glowed coldly, and it jumped up before it began to move in strange patterns. Due to its speed, the creature managed to evade 6 blood chains, but 4 of them managed to surround it to the point where no matter where it tried to escape, it would be impossible. NBS. However, what happened next was something Bai Zemin did not expect. Swoosh! A strange magical energy surged out from the evolved zombie's body, and a semi-transparent colored barrier, whose shape was similar to that of an egg, surrounded the infected's body. The 4 blood chains slammed against the energy barrier, creating metallic sounds before falling to the ground. What? Bai Zemin's eyes widened in shock. However, the evolved zombie suddenly disappeared from its position without giving him time to think too much about what had just happened. Damn it! Bai Zemin quickly turned around and raised his sword in a defensive stance to defend against the unexpected attack. Clang! This time, because he had been taken by surprise, Bai Zemin was forced back approximately 5 meters as his feet dragged on the carpet that adorned the floor. Swoosh! The evolved zombie advanced and slashed twice using both blade-like arms. Clang! Clang! Bai Zemin was forced into defensive mode as he tried to process what had just happened. Wasn't the acquired skill of this evolved zombie the 2 blades on its body? Bai Zemin was dumbfounded and again realized the reason why Lilith had told him before that he had been one of the few beings in the history of the universe capable of successfully defeating and slaying an enemy of a higher order. Such creatures were simply too horrifying. If the evolved creatures of the first order were already this powerful, then how strong were the ones of the second order? Even worse, how strong was Lilith? And all those 6th order existences like her? Only now did Bai Zemin understand the reason why people like Lilith differentiated people like him and her into different categories, lower existences and higher existences. The difference between the 2 of them was simply colossal. Since you have that strange skill, then I will cut off your head with my sword. Bai Zemin gritted his teeth and slashed forward with all his strength. The evolved zombie was sent flying and rolled across the ground several meters before leaping to its feet. However, before it could even take a step forward and burst out with its ghostly speed, Bai Zemin had already appeared before it and was attacking again, forcing the evolved zombie to raise both of its blade-like arms to parry the blow. Bang! Again, the evolved zombie was sent flying, and this time its body hit the wall 20 meters away, making a powerful bang and cracking the wall in the process. Swoosh! Bai Zemin, who had started dashing immediately after sending the evolved zombie flying, appeared in front of the creature at lightning speed and slashed diagonally again with the intention of cutting off its head. I don't believe I can't kill you. His eyes flashed with infinite coldness as he looked at the beastly eyes of the zombie in front of him. Bang! Bai Zemin had swung the Xianyuan sword with such power that the evolved zombie was forced to kneel on one knee while crossing both limbs in an X shape to parry the blow. Even the ground had cracked slightly due to the powerful impact. But that wasn't all that happened. Crack! A very small sound that would normally go unnoticed rang out in the middle of the silent corridor, where 2 beings were struggling to survive and evolve into something superior. The evolved zombie's greenish eyes twitched softly, and a strange growl escaped from its mouth as it looked at the tiny crack that had appeared on both blades. The Xianyuan sword was not a normal rare-grade treasure. It was a rare-grade treasure that was at the peak, with its ability to pierce through almost any defense below level 40, and even being able to pierce through an armored vehicle. Even the 2 blades of the evolved zombie could not withstand being hit with such power by such a weapon. Damn zombie! Bai Zemin spat, and taking advantage of the superior position, turned his body and kicked the evolved zombie in the ribs, sending it flying over 20 meters. The evolved zombie rolled across the floor until it hit the wall of the opposite corridor. If it were any other level 21 living being facing this zombie, that person would undoubtedly die immediately or end up being infected. However, Bai Zemin had been constantly fighting against existences stronger than him, and upon defeating them his stats received a certain power boost, so his actual strength was much more than that of any other level 21. In addition, the current Bai Zemin was under a strange effect in which his reflexes and reaction speed had increased at least 2 or 3 times more than normal due to the rapid circulation of adrenaline through his skill blood manipulation. If only one of these factors were not present, Bai Zemin would have already been defeated because although his strength stat was at least twice higher, his agility was inferior, so he would not even have time to react before being killed. Clang! Bang! The metallic sound and explosions echoed throughout the corridors as the evolved zombie tried to use its superior agility to overwhelm Bai Zemin. However, the creature failed to overcome his reflexes and reaction speed, so it was always sent flying after meeting his sword. Why isn't this zombie using that strange skill it used earlier to parry my attacks? Bai Zemin frowned tightly as he collided with the evolved zombie. The evolved zombie's blades had small cracks that slowly but surely began to spread wider and wider with each collision. However, the beast was not using that strange barrier that had stopped the blood chains. Could it be that it could no longer use it? Such an idea flashed in his mind, and he immediately activated his blood manipulation skill again without worrying about lack of blood, as his previous preparations by spreading blood over most of the corridors had made everything simpler for him. Swoosh! After spending more than 30 mana points, 6 huge blood spears floated in the air and shot at full speed towards the evolved zombie that was struggling to stand up after being sent flying. However, that strange barrier appeared again, causing Bai Zemin to frown. Before discovering the weakness of that skill, he was unwilling to waste any more mana. In the end, Bai Zemin once again entangled with the evolved zombie in a fierce dance to the death where a single mistake could cost anyone their death, slowly forcing the creature to retreat to one of the marked rooms where the final phase of the plan would come into play. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In one of the rooms on the 4th floor. Clang, 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 bang, 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 bang. The sound of metal clanging against metal followed by bangs could be heard inside the room. For friends were sitting in the corner of the room, moving as far away from the door as possible while looking with fearful eyes in that direction. In beta, it's been almost 5 minutes, but the sound of fighting still persists. Lina whispered quietly like the buzzing of a mosquito. The group of friends had been waiting in hope for the arrival of a person with enough strength to save them from this hell they were locked in. However, while the person who had entered the building had gotten farther than the man who had snuck in several days ago, it seemed that this new person had also encountered an obstacle powerful enough to hold him back for so long. It seems we can only pray. Gao Min replied in a whisper as she joined both hands together and began muttering prayers. The moment all hope disappeared, and one could only hope for a supernatural miracle. Even the least believing person would start praying to some kind of almighty God in search of salvation. If this person is also forced to leave, I don't think I can endure another day. Fan Wu could not stop her tears from sliding down her beautiful face. She had already reached the breaking point and was probably the worst of the 4 friends. Wu Yijuan frowned tightly, and a hint of worry glittered in her eyes. She had been the only one of the 4 girls who had glimpsed for a second the person who had charged into the building. Even such a fast person was forced to stop? Wu Yijuan thought inwardly, horrified. If even a person capable of crossing several tens of meters in a few blinks of an eye had been forced to fight for so long without being able to defeat the other side, then this could only mean that the enemy was incredibly powerful. Only now did Wu Yijuan realize how lucky they had been to continue alive so far, and, for the first time in 6 days, she was silently grateful to be locked up in this place she had previously called hell. Bang! As the group of 4 friends prayed for the safety and victory of whoever was fighting whatever was out there, the door of the room was suddenly sent flying alongside a body the height of a human being. The door collapsed. Monster! It's a zombie! Oh my God, it's over! The girls screamed in terror and drew energy from where they didn't know they had it to stand up and run to the other corner as they looked at the blue-skinned zombie getting to its feet with staggering steps. Grr! The evolved zombie opened its mouth and looked at them with eyes filled with murderous intent before taking a step forward. Seeing the greenish eyes of the zombie staring at them with a bloodshot gaze, the faces of the four girls paled with fear. Swoosh! A shadow flashed before the eyes of the four girls before a powerful metallic bang made their ears buzz. When the shadow was forced to stop by the two strange blade-like arms of the strange blue-skinned creature, they finally caught a glimpse of the possible savior of their lives. Bang! The floor cracked, and the window panes were crushed by the shockwave caused by the collision between the Xianyuan sword and the two sharp blades of the evolved zombie. Finally seeing the man who had dared to enter the female dormitory and who had killed who knew how many dangerous creatures to reach this place. The group of four friends was a bit surprised by the fact that he was actually a person 2 or 3 years younger than themselves. However, the biggest surprise was when they saw that this young man actually had the strength to fight on equal footing against a monster so strange and horrifying as that zombie with blue skin and greenish eyes. No, in fact, from the expression on his face, he seemed to have the upper hand. Remembering that terrifying speed at which he crossed the gate and that horrifying strength that was powerful enough to slightly crack the ground without even touching it, Wu Yijuan and her friends could not help but be amazed. Of course, what the four girls felt the most was hope. Hope to survive, hope to finally be released from this prison that was heaven, but at the same time was hell for them. But in fact, Bai Zemin had the upper hand in this battle, almost to the point of overwhelming his enemy. Isn't this thing a bit weak? While clashing swords against the evolved zombie, Bai Zemin couldn't help but whisper such words under his breath. He hadn't paid attention to the four friends in a corner, as although he currently had the advantage, one slip-up would be the end for him. It's not that that creature is weak. In fact, that zombie is very strong, Lilith replied lazily. The problem here is you. After defeating the First Order Blazing Beetle, you got a great boost of power. Besides, among the evolved existences, there are also differences in power and type, as well as a combat style. Bai Zemin nodded before kicking the evolved zombie and making it almost fall out of the window. He had finally reached his target. Now he just had to wait a moment there. Of course, such a thing was not easy since the evolved zombie was constantly moving and with its agility was giving Bai Zemin a headache. Besides Bai Zemin, Lilith's voice sounded again. Your current condition. You're likely to suffer the consequences for manipulating the way your own body works. Bai Zemin was about to ask what she meant by those words when suddenly his expression changed and he growled slightly. A small trickle of blood slipped from the corner of his mouth, leaving him dumbfounded. What is this all about? The evolved zombie hadn't even been able to hit him once. How was he suddenly bleeding? Furthermore, his veins suddenly began to feel extremely hot, as if instead of blood, burning lava was running inside it. I told you. Lilith frowned and a hint of worry flashed in her eyes. You're currently close to creating an active skill thanks to your natural knowledge of human physiology and your blood manipulation skill, but apparently you're still missing something. You should stop manipulating the adrenaline rushing through your veins by controlling your blood, or the pain will only get worse, and you could get seriously hurt. While adrenaline was mostly beneficial, this was so when it was flowing at normal speeds and the body could respond to such stimulation. Bai Zemin's body had been enhanced many times over after absorbing so much soul power. Therefore, the normal speed at which his adrenaline naturally moved was also many times faster than a normal person. However, by manipulating his own blood, Bai Zemin had forced that speed to double. Bai Zemin did not respond, but his eyes glittered and a hint of resolve appeared in them. If he stopped controlling his adrenaline now, that he could through blood flow, then that adrenaline would soon disappear since the initial fright he felt had disappeared after beating up the evolved zombie. If the substance that enhanced his reflexes and reaction speed disappeared, Bai Zemin had no confidence in being able to stop the evolved zombie's attacks. The speed of the evolved zombie was simply too high for the current Bai Zemin, and if he could not defend himself from its attacks, then his superior strength was useless. Besides, he had another motive. Bai Zemin secretly sighed inwardly as he looked sideways at Lilith. Everything had consequences, and he was willing to suffer some of them to achieve his goals. Sometimes, Life was like that, losses and gains being two sides of the same coin. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Meanwhile, in a building a few dozen meters away from the female dormitory, Chunhee and Shangwan Bingshui were standing near a large broken window on the top floor of the building. Chunhee was holding his bow with his left hand and had put on a pair of rubber gloves on his right hand to hold the icy stake that Shangwan Bingshui had crafted. Even though she was controlling the temperature, it was possible to see that his hand was shivering slightly due to the coldness. RA Nigerian Ira Beta. The carbon fiber cable attached to the ice stake was falling out of the window, and a few meters away on the ground Liang Peng could be seen holding the other end of the cable with both hands. The three of them were staring at the fourth-floor windows of the female dormitory, as although Bai Zemin had said he would lure the zombie to one of those windows, it was impossible to tell which one it would be. Over there, Shangwan Bingshui suddenly noticed something strange and raised her pristine hand to indicate the location to Chunhee. Got it. Chunhee nodded and quickly put the eye stake on his bow as he took a professional shooting stance that he had grown accustomed to and had perfected over the years. Shangwan Bingshui glanced at him for a moment before stepping forward and leaping out the window to prepare to fight. While she could attack from afar, the more distant her target was, the longer she would need to control her ice creations in the air, and due to the fact that she had no telekinesis, she needed to expend astronomical amounts of mana. Therefore, she had no choice but to get as close as possible. Chunhee's gaze wandered from the target for a moment and looked at Shangwan Bingshui, who seemed to be floating in the air and hovering like an immortal ice fairy. In the end, he shook his head and quickly focused. "Don't move," he muttered as he narrowed his eyes. In his line of sight, several meters away, he could make out the back of the strange blue-skinned zombie, just as Ming Shui had described. He could also see Bai Zemin's body flashing constantly, entangled in what appeared to be a tenacious fight where swords were constantly clashing. "I got you," Chunhee whispered again for no one in particular, and his eyes flashed coldly before releasing his grip on the bowstring. The ice stake had turned into an arrow that traveled at astonishingly high speeds, and in a matter of a second or two, it had already hit its target. Swoosh! The piercing sound of the howling wind reached Bai Zemin's ears from the first moment the ice stake had left the bowstring's bow. Immediately, and without delay, he pressed the blades of the evolved zombie down with all his might. Instead of sending it flying like the previous times, this time his aim was to do his best to keep it firmly in place without allowing it to move. The ice stake that had been used as an arrow hit the back of the evolved zombie hard and easily went all the way through its body until the tip protruded into the chest area. Roar! A strange roar similar to that of a wounded lion erupted from the evolved zombie's mouth as its green eyes widened, and it began to struggle frantically in an attempt to free itself from the strange object that had pierced its body. Unfortunately for the beast, the ice stake created by Shangwan Bingshui had been shaped in such a way as to make it easy to pierce through flesh, but extremely difficult to get out due to the small sharp spikes protruding in the opposite direction. Realizing that it might be in real danger of death, the evolved zombie began to struggle frantically trying to flee. The smell of rotting flesh and dried blood assaulted Bai Zemin's nostrils. Obviously, the evolved zombie had been delighting in other creatures and other humans slowly over the past few days. However, although the smell was foul, he gritted his teeth and stopped breathing to firmly hold the zombie in the window area without letting it escape. Shangwan Bingshui's ice skill is extremely powerful and amazing, but Chunhee's marksmanship is really great considering he was only using a normal bow to shoot this ice stake. Bai Zemin silently thought. Liang Peng, pull the cable. With all your strength, Bai Zemin shouted out loud. The girls in the dormitory were shocked, but they soon realized that this young man was not alone, as from the floor a deep voice echoed everywhere. "I'm on it." Immediately afterwards, along with a war roar coming from outside the building, the evolved zombie suddenly howled in pain. The eye stake firmly stuck into its flesh, stabbed with far stronger thrust, and tore the inside of the creature's body as the carbon fiber cable was fiercely pulled taut. Due to the great strength used by Liang Peng, the evolved zombie flew out of the fourth-floor window and began to plummet towards the ground. "You girls stay away from the door and wait here." Without looking back, Bai Zemin said those words and jumped out of the window while using one foot to propel himself forward. The group of 4 friends looked at each other and quickly began to move the beds toward the door to act as obstacles that could buy time in dangerous moments, drawing strength from where they didn't know they had it after so many days without good food. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Outside the building, Jawa, Liang Peng screamed at the top of his lungs as the muscles in his body expanded to twice their normal size. "Go to hell." Seeing the blue-skinned zombie falling towards him, Liang Peng raised his huge hammer and swung it behind his body before swinging it with all his strength forward. The surrounding air seemed to blast due to the amount of strength used, and because the evolved zombie was squirming in pain in the middle of the air and unable to control its body, it had no chance to dodge. Bang! The infected was hit hard, and its body that was falling in a curved line was sent flying in a straight line as if it was a meteorite. Bang! The zombie's body hit the wall of the nearby building hard, and a pile of rubble collapsed onto it. Phew! It wasn't so much in the end, was it? Liang Peng looked at Shangwan Bing Shui, who was several meters away, and relaxed. The strength he had used along with the powerful blow of his hammer was enough to bring down an entire house. Liang Peng did not believe that a creature whose body was so thin as a stick could survive after being hit by such a blow. New Thailand body, yes. Retard. It didn't die yet. Bai Zemin shouted after falling to the ground and immediately broke into a sprint at full speed. Swoosh! Suddenly the dust cloud opened up completely and the rubble was cut into countless pieces at lightning speed. Before Liang Peng could react, the evolved zombie charged forward and raised its blade as it fiercely slashed downward. Liang Peng's face turned white like a cartoon ghost. Seeing those bloodshot eyes staring at him with murderous intent brimming over, Liang Peng's last thought was that his life was over. In fact, it should have been. Fortunately for him, Shangwan Bing Shui did not believe that a creature similar in level to the giant elephant beetle would die so easily, even if her reasoning told her that it was impossible to survive such a powerful attack. Ice wall. Shangwan Bing Shui's hurried voice rang out, and less than a second later, a meter-thick wall of ice appeared before Liang Peng, separating him from the evolved zombie just before it managed to deal the killing blow. A tearing sound echoed through all the nearby buildings as the blade of the evolved zombie sliced through the thick wall of ice, as if it was made of soft, thin cotton. Ice bullets. Shangwan Bing Shui couldn't help but let her expression change when she saw how easily her defensive wall was knocked down and quickly gritted her teeth, spending a quarter of her current mana to create 20 small ice bullets and launch them forward. The ice bullets looked like real bullets as they moved at speeds difficult to track with the naked eye. However, to Shangwan Bing Shui's disbelief, the evolved zombie's greenish eyes glowed and the bullets were deflected by the same strange energy barrier that had stopped Bai Zemin's blood chains and blood spears. The sound of the ice bullets hitting the strange barrier was similar to that of small metal spheres hitting a steel plate, and a second later, all the ice bullets had melted into the ground. Swoosh! 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 The wind howled, and the evolved zombie quickly turned its body before starting to cut with its only intact blade, as one of them had been destroyed by Zemin's constant attacks, and Liang Peng's powerful final blow with his hammer. In less than a second, the creature had managed to make 3 different cuts, showing that even if it was wounded at speed, was still as scary and horrifying as ever. Clang! 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 After 3 metallic sounds, 3 arrows fell to the ground a close distance from the evolved zombie. The evolved zombie looked towards the distant building, and its eyes glowed ominously as it glared at Chun-Hee, who was stunned to see the power demonstrated by the zombie in front of him. In fact, it was not only Chun-Hee. Shangwan Bing Shui and Liang Peng were shocked and frightened after realizing the reason why Bai Zemin had previously refused to fight this creature. Was this the power of a first-order creature? The blue-skinned zombie's power was too strong. In just 2 seconds, it had shown enough power to prove to them that no one could really stop it. Shangguan Bing Shui, Liang Peng, and Chen He's confrontation against the blue-skinned zombie had been brief, only 2 or 3 seconds in total. However, those 2 or 3 seconds were enough for each of them to realize how strong the enemy in front of them was. In fact, only Liang Peng had managed to successfully hit the strange zombie once, and the only reason he had managed to do so was because the zombie was in the air, unable to defend itself and suffering great amounts of pain. It had only been a few seconds, but during that short and scarce time, the life of one of the strongest evolved fighters of the group was close to perishing. Too strong and too terrifying. That was the general thought of the three of them. Swoosh! The blue-skinned zombie saw Bai Zemin running towards it and quickly took off running. Clearly, the infected creature seemed to know that confronting him would put it in danger, so it tried to take the opportunity to run away. Does this damn creature already have a basic level of intelligence? Bai Zemin felt his scalp stand up at the thought of such a fast zombie lurking in the nights, waiting for the opportunity to attack. Stop it! We can't let it slip away from us. Bai Zemin gritted his teeth and pushed his speed to the limit. Although he still had status points free and could add them to agility at any time, unless extremely necessary, he wasn't willing to waste them so casually. The evolved zombie that was trying to flee was running in the direction where Shangguan Bing Shui was, so when it arrived in front of her and saw her blocking the way, the creature howled strangely and slashed downward with its blade. Chinny's face turned pale at the sight of the zombie's intentions, and his legs felt weak as he realized that he not only had no time to react, but also could do nothing more than watch as the life of his loved one was at risk. Even Bai Zemin, who was the fastest of the group, did not have the ability to close such a large distance in such a short time, as he would need at least a second or two more. But what everyone saw was not Shangguan Bing Shui's beautiful body being cut into 2 halves. Clang! After a sound of metal clanging against metal, everyone saw the ice beauty raising a small curved dagger to the level of her head. The blade of the evolved zombie was large, but Shangguan Bing Shui had actually used such a small bladed weapon to parry its attack. Moreover, from her grip on the dagger and the cold expression on her face, even a fool could tell that it wasn't luck, and she was definitely a trained person skilled in close combat. Perfect! Shangguan Bing Shui hold it there. Bai Zemin couldn't help but praise loudly. In the next instant, he reached for the zombie's back and quickly raised his sword high before performing an oblique slash. The evolved zombie tried to turn around to stop Bai Zemin's attack, but Shangguan Bing Shui did not allow it to do what it wanted. She leaned her body forward and used all her strength to oblige the zombie to stand in place. Thanks to the zombie's strength not being especially high, she was not forced to retreat and seemed to be able to stand her ground in a close battle. Slash! At the last instant, and just before losing its head, the evolved zombie tilted its body at a strange angle, causing Bai Zemin's slash to miss. However, the creature was by no means unscathed. Yowl! A high-pitched howl escaped uncontrollably from the evolved zombie's mouth. Its left arm had been completely hacked off along with a portion of its ribs. Blood had begun to gush out like an endless fountain, and from the distorted expression, it was obvious that unlike normal zombies that did not fear pain or death, this zombie could feel great amounts of pain. Shangguan Bing Shui took the opportunity when the evolved zombie was writhing in pain, and with her free hand, she used all her mana to make an ice sword. Her face turned as white as a sheet, and she felt her world spinning around her. Even so, she bit her lips, making them bleed, and stabbed forward. RS. The ice sword created with all her mana pierced the evolved zombie's body with ease. The creature's stomach split open before it began to freeze from the inside out, hindering its movements immensely. The beast roared ferociously, trying to break free, but that was its last fight. Bai Zemin used the momentum of his previous attack to make a full turn and made a horizontal slash. This time, thanks to Shangguan Bing Shui's support, the evolved zombie had neither the ability nor the luck to avoid the attack. The zombie's head shot up into the sky before falling to the ground with a thud and rolling 2 or 3 times. Soon after, The body of a now headless evolved zombie fell to the side and dark-colored blood began to spurt out uncontrollably, staining the ground completely in just a few seconds. 4 orbs of energy came out of the zombie's body, and each orb entered each person's body. Chunhe and Liang Peng's were similar. Shengwan Bingshue's was about 2 or 3 times brighter, and Bai Zemin's was several times brighter than theirs. Chunhe finally sighed in relief, and his heart that seemed to be about to burst out of his mouth managed to settle down. Liang Peng was still frozen, apparently unable to react. This was also natural, considering that the entire battle had lasted less than 5 seconds, and his life was a hair's breadth away from being over, if not for the timely intervention of his party members. Shengwan Bingshue still seemed to be in combat mode, as she was still clinging tightly to the dagger in her hands. This dagger was precisely the normal gray treasure that Bai Zemin had given her earlier. Her generous chest rose and fell as she looked forward with her eyes wide open, and her sickly pale face made her look extremely pitiful. On the other hand, Bai Zemin finally managed to relax his tense muscles and secretly let out a sigh of relief. While it was true that throughout the fight he was superior, the reality was that his life had always been on the line, since the slightest of mistakes for him meant ultimate death. Cough. After deactivating his blood manipulation skill and ceasing to manipulate his own bloodstream, Bai Zemin covered his mouth with one hand and spat out a mouthful of fresh blood into his palm. Hey! Shengwan Bingshue finally seemed to wake up and realize that victory was theirs. However, seeing the drops of blood escaping down the seam of his fingers, she couldn't help her eyes from widening a little. Bai Zemin gritted his teeth in an effort to endure the pain of his blood vessels shaking nonstop, and looked at Shengwan Bingshue with calm eyes. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand, and with his dark eyes fixed into her blue eyes, he calmly said, "Now you and I are equal. I don't owe you anything anymore." Sorry, I didn't hear you. Shengwan Bingshue furrowed her eyebrows slightly and leaned forward a little closer. She wasn't pretending that she hadn't heard anything. The problem was that she really hadn't heard, because Bai Zemin had spoken in a tone of voice that was too low due to the pain that he was feeling, and because Shengwan Bingshue herself was experiencing mental exhaustion as a result of losing all her mana all at once. It so happened that there was a blip in what one wanted to express and what the other was going to hear. Bai Zemin looked at her for a moment before shaking his head and calmly saying, "It's nothing." There was no need for him to say anything anyway. She probably already knew that, too, considering how smart she was. "By the way, are you okay?" Shengwan Bingshue did not continue with the previous matter, and instead looked at the blood dripping from his hand and pointed. "No need to worry, it's no big deal." Bai Zemin waved his hand and dealt with it as if it was nothing. In fact, except for the pain that he felt coming from his blood vessels, as long as he was careful and didn't force his blood flow for a day or two, he should be fine. "I see." Shengwan Bingshue nodded and didn't ask any more questions either. "Hey, both of you." Chunhe walked up at that moment and looked at the two of them. "Are you both okay?" Bai Zemin looked at him, and seeing how his eyes lingered on Shengwan Bingshue couldn't help but chuckle. This person is quite obvious. Although he was asking the two of them, he was doing it out of politeness and the fact that they were all a team. But Bai Zemin could see that the handsome expert archer's real concern was the icy beauty dressed in white. "Except for exhausting my mana, there is no problem with me at all." Shengwan Bingshue shook her head softly and couldn't help but look at the red blood on Bai Zemin's hand again with a frown. "I'm all right too." Bai Zemin gave the same reply and turned his attention away from them to look at Liang Peng. "Hey, big boy, are you all right?" Liang Peng, who was standing silently as if frozen, seemed to wake up at Bai Zemin's words. He looked at everyone before looking at Shengwan Bingshue with a complex look. In the end, the hammerman sighed and left without saying anything. Apparently, the previous battle had been a big surprise to him, even more so considering how close he had come to dying and how helpless he had been in front of the evolved zombie. The place remained silent, as if each of the three were immersed in their own thoughts. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of awkwardness, Chunhe looked at Bai Zemin, who was casually standing there, as if deliberating something, and asked, Bai Zemin, the giant beetle from before. Did you really defeat it single-handedly? Yeah, although it was harder back then. That beetle was stronger, and the me from back then was weaker. Bai Zemin replied, lightly, without paying too much attention to him. He leaned against the wall and began to read the messages with green letters in his retina that no one but him could see. Hearing his casual words, knowing that the giant elephant beetle was even more hideous than the decapitated zombie on the ground, and remembering Bai Zemin's deplorable condition 3 days ago, Chunhee couldn't help but sigh as his eyes glittered with a hint of bitterness and jealousy. Chunhee had always been praised since he was young as an outstanding talent. It didn't matter if it was grades, sports, attitude, personality, appearance, status. Chunhee basically had it all. Before the soul record reached planet Earth, Chunhee did not even know that there was a person named Bai Zemin in this world. But this was also natural. After all, the person named Bai Zemin was nothing special. RES, a third-year student who barely got the necessary grades to enter this university, from a middle-class family, an employee of an automobile workshop that also functioned as a blacksmith shop, and whose appearance was just average. Bai Zemin also had no one close to him, while Chunhee was always surrounded by all kinds of people like stars surrounding the moon. The difference between the two was abysmal, as great as the distance between heaven and earth. But what about now? After the soul record came to this world, Chunhee realized that except for his appearance and his background, that he still didn't know whether it continued in existence or not. Bai Zemin was overwhelmingly superior. This was something he already knew, but unconsciously ignored or did not want to accept. However, after today's fight against Xiao Long and after the final battle against the evolved zombie, Chunhee finally accepted the reality. This world really had changed, and the past was just that past. Shangwan Bing Shuel looked at her childhood friend, who looked bitter and sad, but at the same time, a touch relieved, unsure of what he was thinking. In the end, she just said the first thing that came to her mind, Chunhee, that was a good shot. He looked at her for several seconds, appreciating every inch of her face as if to burn every detail into his memory. Finally, he smiled and nodded. It was. With nothing more to say, Shangwan Bing Shuel looked at Bai Zemin and frowned as she saw that he still seemed to ignore the surroundings completely. In fact, he seemed to have forgotten about the existence of the two of them, as he currently seemed to be talking in a low voice to himself. Had this person gone crazy? Shangwan Bing Shuel couldn't help but let that thought flash through her mind before forcibly shaking it off. In the end, she looked at the orbs beside the zombie corpse before turning her gaze towards him again. Bai Zemin, are you really okay? Bai Zemin blinked and looked at the two people blankly. He naturally hadn't gone crazy. It was just that he was currently having a small talk with Lilith about what to do next, and was so secretly excited that he ended up forgetting about Shangwan Bing Shuel and Chunhee's existence. In fact, he had even forgotten about something very important as well. Shangwan Bing Shuel looked at him for a moment, and, at his confused face, she couldn't help but shook her head. In the end, she pointed to the ground and said in an indifferent voice, "What shall we do with these things? I mean the distribution." Bai Zemin looked at the spot pointed out by Shangwan Bing Shuel, and seeing the glowing orbs lying on the ground almost felt like shouting out loud. A red orb equivalent to a normal gray treasure, an orange orb equivalent to a rare gray treasure, and a yellow orb equivalent to a magic gray treasure. 3 orbs that contained treasures. Because Liang Peng had left a bit dejected and apparently with a lot of things to think about, there were only 3 people left present, exactly the same amount of orbs that the evolved zombie had dropped this time. This had made things easier, as it would otherwise be difficult to start distributing the loot. Although it was likely that Liang Peng would give up his share in order to feel less indebted, it was also not certain that such a thing would happen. After all, the human heart was unpredictable. Besides, Bai Zemin did not know whether Shangwan Bing Shuel and Chunhee knew about the existence of the orbs and how they were distributed according to their colors. Wouldn't it be good to take advantage of that as much as possible then? However, that was merely a fleeting thought, as Bai Zemin knew that it was not easy to deceive the 2 people in front of him. Chunhee and Shangwan Bing Shuel were 2 extremely smart people, especially her, who was not only smart, but also cunning as a fox. Indeed, as he looked at her, he saw that she was also staring at him. "I like the color yellow," Bai Zemin said out of nowhere. Chun-Hee and Shangwan Bing Shui looked at each other strangely before she turned to look at him and said with a smile, "I love yellow too." Bai Zemin was already immune to her cunning little fox smile. Instead, he gave her a friendly smile and continued, "Well, too bad. Considering that my contribution is the highest, I guess I'll be shameless and take the yellow orb. Want to play games of cunning with me? You're still too immature." Bai Zemin secretly sneered. Indeed, Shangwan Bing Shui's smile disappeared in the blink of an eye, and she looked at him with the same indifferent look as always while secretly clicking her tongue and muttering something that probably only she could understand. With nothing more to say, Bai Zemin stepped forward and picked up the yellow orb with delight. This was his second yellow orb, and thus his second magic grade treasure. How could he not be secretly excited? After picking up the orb, Bai Zemin looked at Shangwan Bing Shui and Chun-Hee and slowly explained. "Red ore contains a normal grade treasure and orange orb a rare grade treasure. Although I think it's quite obvious, but the normal treasure is inferior to the rare treasure. Still, both are good stuff. You two decide who gets what." Hearing Bai Zemin's explanation, and after remaining silent for a moment, Chun-Hee looked at Shangwan Bing Shui and waved his hands as he said, "Bing Shui, you take the rare treasure. I couldn't do much during the battle, and, except for shooting the ice stake that you created, my contribution is even inferior to Liang Peng. At least he managed to break one of that creature's blades." Shangwan Bing Shui did not stand on ceremony and nodded without saying a word. At a certain point, she and Bai Zemin had the same main goal: to survive. In order to survive and not fall and then be devoured by some strange creature, she needed power, and treasures were undoubtedly a good way to acquire such power. Even if it was external strength, the treasures could help them defeat more powerful enemies, which would allow her to absorb a greater amount of pure soul power. Without saying a word, each of them kept their respective loot of victory to look at and study later. "Let's start inspecting the female dormitory." Bai Zemin frowned and said with some confusion, "I think there's something weird in there." Shangwan Bing Shui looked at him strangely, but said nothing and nodded indifferently before starting to walk towards a nearby building. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The survivors were left in a nearby building under the protection of Fu Xiefeng, Kai Jingyi, and Zhongde, although none of the three had treasure-level weapons. Any iron pipe or wooden stick was enough to deal with the zombies, considering that they all possessed a skill and a stat at least 2 or 3 times higher than that of a normal person. A careful search was conducted in the female dormitory, and the ones in charge were Bai Zemin, Chun-Hee, Shangwan Bing Shui, and Liang Peng, who had already recovered a bit from his negative thoughts. The lower and second floors were devoid of any signs of life. Both floors had been cleared by the zombies or Qiaolong in the past. On the third floor, approximately 30 female students were found who were still alive. However, the biggest surprise was that on the fourth floor there were over 100 female students alive. A beta epsilon. Although all of them were weak, and some of them seemed to have become a bit mentally ill with all that was occurring, at least they were still alive and had a chance to lead as good a life as possible, unlike those who had been eaten alive. In a room on the fourth floor, Bing Shui, Gao Min jumped into Shangwan Bing Shui's arms and began to sob like a little girl releasing all her grievances with her parents after being bullied by someone bigger. Gao Min had been practically the pillar of her group, since Li Na and Fan Wu needed constant mental support in order to overcome the mental pressure and hunger that threatened to drive them crazy. After all, it was not easy to go through such an abrupt change overnight. On the other hand, Wu Yijuan was generally quiet and silent, so it was difficult to know what she was thinking or if she was well. Therefore, Gao Min could only take on the role of the pillar by herself unless she wanted to see her friends dying in front of her eyes. "It's okay. Everything will be fine now." Shangwan Bing Shui gently stroked the girl's back in her arms and let out an inaudible sigh. It wasn't just Gao Min. Shangwan Bing Shui was also assaulted by Li Na and Fan Wu, so she had to take some time to calm her friends down. Although they had only met 3 or 4 years ago, they had become very close to each other, and Shangwan Bing Shui was really happy that they were safe. "Yijuan, It's good to see that you're okay. Chun-Yi looked at the stand-up beauty and sighed. If anything happened to you, your father and grandfather would go crazy later. All thanks to you guys who arrived on time. Wu Yijun smiled slightly and nodded. Even though she was not in her best condition due to not being able to eat properly for almost a week, her clothes were clean and the smell of her body was sweet as roses thanks to the shower in the dormitory. Every day, the girls showered very carefully and without making too much noise every time they stepped into the hot tub to avoid attracting zombies. So, they were comfortable in that sense at least. At first, they were reluctant out of fear. But hunger, confinement, and the discomfort of not being able to take a hot shower were making everything more difficult for them. So, after 2 or 3 days of deliverance, the four decided that if they were going to die, at least they might as well release one of their sorrows. Chen-He, Shengwan Bing Shui, and Wu Yijun were the 3 friends who had known each other since childhood due to their family ties. The 3 were about the same age, with Wu Yijun being the youngest of the group by 1 year. The reason why Chun-He had previously said that if anything happened to Wu Yijun, her father and grandfather would go crazy when they found out was because, in fact, her status was not at all normal, even surpassing Chun-He's military family status by a large margin. She was actually the granddaughter of the current Prime Minister of China, Wu Jianhong, being known as one of the 8 most powerful men in the whole country. Her father, Wu Keqian, was the current mayor of the Chongping district of Beijing City, which consisted of a total of 10 localities. Wu Yijun's Wu family was not only one of the most terrifying and politically powerful families in all of China, but in recent years had also begun to expand into the military field since one of Wu Yijun's uncles had quickly risen through the ranks of the army. Basically, Wu Yijun's status was that of a little princess in the past, and it was precisely because of her powerful backing that no one had dared to lay a finger on her, although there were countless outstanding young men drooling to court her, and all those who had dared to try had disappeared without alerting anyone. If she, the most beloved granddaughter of the second most powerful man in all of China, suffered any backlash, if the army managed to overcome this tribulation and the central government remained standing, the whole country would probably be shaken by the wrath of the Wu family. Even launching nuclear warheads on the zombies was not impossible. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Bai Zemin had stood outside the room for several minutes, observing the group's friendly reunion from corner. The tears of pain and relief, as well as the muffled sobbing of the 3 girls surrounding Shengwan Bing Shui. He looked at all of this with a complicated expression before shook his head softly and turned around to leave quietly. As he walked silently down the corridor, a silence where even his footsteps could not be heard, the beautiful woman walking beside him tilted her head and asked curiously, "Could it be that you are jealous?" "Huh?" Bai Zemin looked at her with raised eyebrows and asked in return, "Could it be that you've gone completely mad, beautiful queen?" "Don't be shy, just admit it," Lilith said in a playful voice before suddenly jumping on him as she said cheerfully, "This beautiful big sister will spoil you a lot. Come here. You. Let go of me, you perverted succubus. If you want my life, energy, you'll have to fight a lot harder than this." He began to push, trying to break free. "I told you it's not like that." Fortunately, no one was present, or else they might see the amusing scene of a young man struggling against seeming nothingness, as if he had gone completely insane. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. After calming down the Gao Min trio and allowing them to eat something light to open their stomachs, Shengwan Bing Shui approached Wu Yijun, who was drinking boxed milk along with a bread bun, and gave her a rare, genuine smile. "I'm glad you're safe and healthy, Yijun." Wu Yijun reciprocated the genuine smile and looked at her with a relieved but somewhat complex look as she said, "Although I knew you would definitely be fine since it's you, I didn't expect you to become this strong." Earlier, after slightly ensuring the entrance to the room, Wu Yijun could not help but approach the window, so she had witnessed with her own eyes the short but dangerous battle of the group of 4 against the strange blue-skinned zombie. She had seen how Shengwan Bing Shui created and controlled ice as if she was a goddess, so she couldn't help but feel a touch of envy of her. After all, while Shengwan Bing Shui had obtained the ability and power to defend herself, Wu Yijun herself could only hide in this small room in order to survive. Shangwan Bing Shui seemed to know what her good friend's thoughts were, but she shook her head and sighed lightly as she explained in a somewhat sad voice, which was in stark contrast to her usually cold and immovable tone. No, actually, I was just lucky. At that time, Xiaobai turned into a strange creature, but before it could move, it seemed to be frozen. I take the opportunity and stabbed it with a knife. Xiaobai was actually the little white rabbit that Shangwan Bing Shui's mother had given her, and she really loved it very much. Xiaobai was a rather old rabbit that had been with her for over 5 years, but the mana had affected it as its body was mutated, and, seizing the moment as she noticed something was wrong, she killed it, thus gaining her ice maker skill. I see. Sorry about that. Wu Yijun finally understood and looked at her with a tinge of sympathy. As her best friend and childhood acquaintance, Wu Yijun knew how important Xiao Bai was to her and the significance of that rabbit in her heart. The fact that Shangwan Bing Shui had the courage and resolve to end its life without hesitation was something that not many people would be able to do. Rainos. By the way, trying to change Shangwan Bing Shui's somewhat subdued mood and wanting to ask this for quite some time now, Wu Yijun looked at the surroundings and asked in confusion, "The guy with the sword and black coat from before is not with you? He left with the man with the beard and that big hammer?" Hearing her question, Gao Min, Lina, and Fan Wu looked at Shangwan Bing Shui and Chun He waiting for a response. Because Bai Zemin had stayed outside the room in a corner, the 4 girls had not seen him, so they had thought he was doing another task. While it was true that they were happy to see their friends, especially Wu Yijun since they had been friends since childhood, and while it was true that they were surprised to see that Chun He and Shangwan Bing Shui seemed to have become more powerful people, the person who had left the biggest impression on the minds of the 4 girls had been the one who had sneaked into the dormitory and killed his way here. This was especially true for Wu Yijun. She had seen how Bai Zemin was the only person capable of fighting in the upper hand against that blue-skinned zombie, so her impression of him was the greatest. Therefore, not seeing him here, she couldn't help but wonder. Considering his strength, he definitely had to be one of the leaders. But where was he then? Now that you mention it. Chun He blinked and looked at the surroundings, dumbfounded as he said, "Wasn't he just behind us a few minutes ago? How did he suddenly disappear?" Shangwan Bing Shui was also speechless. After looking around the surroundings and not finding him anywhere, she couldn't help but grit her teeth as she complained in a low voice. "This person, he really is like an uncontrollable horse. Didn't we all agree to move together before?" "Oh." Wu Yijun looked somewhat surprised and asked curiously, "It seems that you guys aren't a very close group?" "Well, it's not that we don't get along badly either," Chun He replied with a forced smile. "It's just that he's a bit special. He usually stays alone in a corner and doesn't seem particularly willing to talk to anyone. Therefore, it's hard to get close to him. Even with our princess being Shui there, that guy can stay away." Wu Yijun joked as she looked at Shangwan Bing Shui. They were both beautiful women in their own right. It was just that the beauty of both of them was different. If Shangwan Bing Shui was a beautiful ice goddess who seemed pure and remote, then Wu Yijun was more of a beautiful ardent goddess with a more playful and gentle attitude. Shangwan Bing Shui had been ranked as the #1 beauty in the entire university, while Wu Yijun had been ranked second. However, this was because Shangwan Bing Shui had more suitors and admirers, but Wu Yijun was also courted by countless men who thought she was more beautiful. Chun He looked at Shangwan Bing Shui for a moment before hesitantly responding, "Actually, he doesn't seem to look at Bing Shui in any particular way. Maybe he has a girlfriend? Or maybe he's just not attracted to her. After all, before the whole world changed, he was an unknown person to us, so we don't know much about him. MMH. Who knows?" Wu Yijun smiled mysteriously and did not pursue the matter further. "We'd better go find that guy." Shangwan Bing Shui sighed exhaustedly before turning around and walking towards the exit without waiting for an answer. She still remembered that Bai Zemin had said that he suspected that there might be something strange in this building. This was precisely the reason why they had all agreed to move together before he suddenly disappeared. Chun He and the group of 4 friends quickly walked after her, and so the group of 6 began to inspect the 4th floor, room by room. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On the other hand, in one of the rooms on the fourth floor, the person who Shangguan Bing Shui's group was looking for was currently looking at the scene in front of him with a curious look. Earlier, the reason why Bai Zemin had suspected that there was something wrong with the blue-skinned evolved zombie's behavior was because the creature's behavior was too different from the rest of the zombies he had encountered so far. Normal zombies had no vision, only instinct, sound, and smell to find prey to devour. Whenever a living being appeared within their detection range, the zombies would definitely advance towards that place regardless of whether the other party was strong or weak, and with the only thought of eating their flesh and drinking their blood. However, the blue-skinned zombie had contradicted all of this almost completely. Phase 1 of the plan was not only to make noise to attract normal zombies and other creatures from the surrounding area, it was also to lure the evolved zombie out of the building and attack it together. However, the evolved zombie did not come out no matter how many glass windows they broke. In fact, even when Bai Zemin entered the female dormitory after kicking the front door loudly, the blue-skinned creature had not yet moved from the place where it was, and only when Bai Zemin reached the fourth floor did it move. Considering the speed of the evolved zombie, if Qiao Long wanted to run away, then it would be difficult if he was chased by it. However, the evolved zombie had not hunted him down after expelling him and simply stayed inside the building. Our new Epsilon S. Moreover, the zombie also seemed to want to return to the building before fleeing when it faced the attack of Bai Zemin and the rest after being forcibly dragged out by the eye stake binding created by Shangguan Bing Shui. But Bai Zemin did not expect something like this. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked in confusion with a frown as looked at the plant in front of his eyes in detail. This was a small plant, small enough to be carried in his pants pocket as it barely reached the height of a palm. Its leaves were natural green color, but the strange thing was that there were tiny light green and red orbs hanging from some of the leaves. The green orbs were small, only the size of half a fingernail at most, and there were barely 5 of them. On the other hand, the red orbs were a bit bigger, about the size of a full fingernail, and they were also scarcer as there were only 2 of them. "That's a mutant plant." Lith approached him and touched the plant with the tip of her perfect finger as she patiently explained, after the arrival of the soul record on different worlds and with the mana movement or the appearance of said power source, different organisms will be pushed into evolution. This is something you already know, isn't it? You had explained it to me before, yes. Bai Zemin nodded and stared into her eyes, seemingly lost in that red wine, glowing like rubies. Lilith continued, "Good. However, there are different forms of evolution, and not all organisms are able to withstand the pressure of mana entering their bodies. Let me explain it this way. Those zombies that are rampant in the streets are organisms that did not manage to adapt and overcome the mana that entered their bodies and the union of different viruses. These viruses, in order not to be killed by mana, united to form a new infectious virus. As for how something like that happened, I don't know, since each world is precisely a different world of possibilities, and as I mentioned before, it is not known exactly what is the functioning or the reason of this existence called soul record. In fact, it is not known whether there is a purpose to begin with or not." Bai Zemin lowered his head in contemplation and stood silently for a couple of minutes to digest and comprehend the new information before raising his head again to look her in the eye and nod gently. Seeing him nod, Lilith finally got to the point for which this conversation had begun. With plants, something similar happens. Some plants manage to adapt to the mana and can become terrifying monsters, and other plants, like this little one here, just mutate differently, just like the zombies out there. Some of these plants can bear fruits that are beneficial to the body, and others can bear fruits that can make a living being's body blast into 1,000 pieces after consuming it. "I see." Bai Zemin finally understood, and his gaze fell on the small plant, deep in thought. Currently, he was 80% sure that this small, exotic-looking mutant plant was a good treasure. The reason for this thought arose from the fact that the evolved zombie definitely did not want to leave this place because of the existence of this plant, and since zombies had not yet acquired enough intelligence, the creature never thought of uprooting the plant and moving it to another place. While it was true that the blue-skinned evolved zombie had tried to flee after realizing that if it confronted the entire party of Bai Zemin, it would end up dying, this did not necessarily mean that it was an intelligent creature. It was probably just a battle instinct, and that the evolved zombie could sense which wars it could win and which ones it had no hope of victory in. Since the world had become a kind of wild jungle, it was easy to assume that the evolved zombie, as an officially evolved creature, was capable of commanding zombies to some extent, but only in relatively small numbers. This was natural, just as the adult lions were the leaders of the pack and led the smaller or weaker lions. Probably, the evolved zombie did not want other zombies to be on the fourth floor because of the existence of this mutated plant, as it was a treasure to it, and it was probably worried that the plant would be taken away from it. But there was a problem with this little plant, and that was that while Bai Zemin was about 80% sure that it was a good treasure for the body, the other 20% was what was holding him back from eating one of its fruits. 80% versus 20% was a considerably higher amount. However, that 20% was not 0%, and if Bai Zemin's guess was wrong then, just as Lilith had said, it was likely that his body would end up bursting into a blood mist, and that was an idea he was not too pleased to imagine. Wouldn't it be ridiculous to die from eating something he didn't know what it was instead of dying fighting? Of course, it wasn't as if he had any plans to die. But if he really had to die, he didn't want a pathetic death like that. Lilith, don't you have a way of knowing if this mutated plant is good or not? Bai Zemin looked at her and scratched his head, not knowing what to do. Lilith shrugged her shoulders and said in a helpless voice, I am not an all-knowing existence. Bai Zemin, as I told you before, each world means a different world of probabilities, and I can only help you with knowledge shared from other worlds. As for things specific and native from this world, that is something you will have to discover by yourself. Bai Zemin was dumbfounded for a moment before forcing a smile, and shook his head softly. Forget it, I'll find a way, Bai Zemin thought as he took out an empty bottle and put in the earth from other plants in the room. Then he carefully removed the roots of the small mutated plant and moved it to its new home. Bai Zemin pierced several holes in the plastic bottle using the sharp point of the treasure glove on his left hand, and then stored the bottle with the plant inside into a separate small pocket of his backpack, making sure to leave a small part open to let the air and rays of sunlight penetrate. Until he reached a safe place. This was all he could do temporarily. Bai Zemin, didn't we say we would all move together? Just as Bai Zemin had finished putting away the small mutated plant, a cold and indifferent voice containing a hint of reproach sounded from the entrance of the room. Even without turning around, Bai Zemin already knew to whom that cold, but at the same time, tranquilizing voice belonged. He slowly stood up and slung his backpack over his shoulder before turning around and said with a smile, Well, I saw that you all seemed to know each other, and I didn't want to interrupt your heartwarming meeting. You, Shangguan Bing Shui wanted to say something, but the reality was that it was in fact they were the ones who had dawdled for too long. Seeing her silently admit defeat, Bai Zemin couldn't help but feel a little better about himself, and without another word walked towards the exit. Wait a moment, please. He wanted to leave as he had something important to do, but apparently more people wanted to hold him back. Bai Zemin turned around with a frown and looked at a girl whom he didn't know who was looking at him gratefully. Do I know you? No. Well, you saved me before. Li Na walked over and bowed profusely as she thanked him through tears. Thank you really very much for today, earlier. If it wasn't for you killing all those horrendous zombies and getting that blue-skinned zombie out of the building, I'm afraid I could only starve to death locked in that room. Alphaness. Bai Zemin saw that it wasn't just one girl. There were 3 more nodding and looking at him with eyes filled with gratitude. After a few seconds, he finally remembered that these girls were the ones in the room whose door was smashed down by him when he sent the evolved zombie flying with a kick. It's nothing. Bai Zemin smiled slightly and pointed at Shangguan Bing Shui while slowly saying, If you want to thank someone, thank the president of the student association over there. I owed her a favor in the past, and she used that favor to request my help, or else it is unlikely that I would have risked fighting that evolved zombie. Bai Zemin did not take credit he thought undeserved and directly pointed to the real hero here. However, The gaze of the four friends towards him did not change. Although Bai Zemin wondered if that look of gratitude would remain on their faces when they learned that he had thrown a person alive into the zombies to be eaten a few hours ago. That was none of their business anyway, and it wasn't like it hurt him either. Everyone was free to do as they pleased, and even more so in this new world. By the way, Shengwan Bing Shui. Bai Zemin turned around to leave before he remembered something and paused for a moment as he said, "Tomorrow, I'll start clearing the path in a southerly direction to leave the university." Shengwan Bing Shui knew what he meant even without him saying anything else. She remained silent for quite some time, apparently considering a few things before raising her head again to look at him and slowly saying, "Why don't you wait another day or two?" "Oh, and why?" Bai Zemin raised an eyebrow, slightly confused, but not angry since from what he had seen of her so far, Shengwan Bing Shui was a woman who 90% of the time was rational and clear-thinking. Therefore, he was willing to listen to her opinion and ideas. "Remember the giant beetle? We still need to take care of that, and while clearing the path to the exit will take some time, at least we need a day or two to find someone willing to taste the meat first." Shengwan Bing Shui paused for a moment before continuing. "Besides, where Qiaolong was staying were the keys of the school buses, so we can use them to leave as long as we make our way to the parking lot. But even then we need to make some adjustments to the windows." Bai Zemin's eyes lit up slightly upon hearing Shengwan Bing Shui's reason, as he had heard something that mattered more to him than the beetle's meat at the moment.